Chapter 1957. Yen Laobei was an individual separated from the evil soul. Although he retained his unique kindness, the two of them came from the same source. If he did not die, he could rely on his evil heart to absorb the resentment of the four regions, and the evil soul would return to the human world sooner or later. Yen Laobei's sacrifice was inevitable. Only his death could end the chaos. After the seal awarding ceremony ended, the supreme martial artists returned to the sect with the people from the orthodoxy and the resurrected. The four regions returned to their original order. From that day onwards, many array deity temples were built. Statues of array deity Yen were placed in the temples for future generations to remember. However, the martial arts cultivation world had erected statues of the Elixir deity. Overlords, large and small sect, and even bandit gangs all worshipped Qin Hao's statue. The Elixir deity was the ruler of the heavenly path, the only god in the continent. His divine consciousness looked down on all living beings, and no one disrespected him. The construction of the divine pavilion had completely pushed martial arts to its peak. The Four Regions sect had started to find talents from various sources. Other than some ancient families, even the overlords had abandoned their old traditions. Regardless of status or background, as long as one's ability was outstanding, the sect would vigorously cultivate and allocate resources to them. It was no longer like before, when it was reserved for direct disciples. The original intention of the Divine Pavilion was naturally to continue the divine path. If a supreme talent was born from a certain force, he could comprehend the divine decree and become the god of the sect. Naturally, it would be incomparably glorious and eye-catching, and it would be more beneficial for the orthodoxy to become stronger. Of course, before that, the warriors who entered the divine pavilion had to cultivate to the emperor level. This was the threshold. Not entering the divine pavilion without entering the emperor's path was also a rule set by Qin Hao. If a cultivator's ability was too weak, they would not be able to withstand the divine decree and would easily die. The Phoenix Flower sect in the north, the Taoist sect in the south, the Warring States sect and the Celestial sect in the west, the Jiuying Sword Palace in the middle, and the Qin Imperial Palace in the east had divine pavilions. Every divine pavilion was guarded by divine guards who were responsible for supervising the assessment. Other than that, the seven heroes of the south, Luo Shui of the western Liang, Shao Qi of the northern borderline, and the Penglai Shuo tribe all had their own divine pavilions. The divine pavilion worshipped the statue of the Elixir deity, and there were tens of thousands of scrolls of emperor's techniques. They covered a wide range of subjects, such as elixir studies, weapon refinery, formations, martial arts techniques, and spells. They were unlike the other orthodoxies, who specialized in one area and gathered the best of 100 studies. Furthermore, they were of a very high level and had great power. These emperor techniques were naturally the cultivation techniques that had been passed down in the Divine Palace, including the Daozong Peak's Spirit Hua technique, the Mizang Peak's 9 Palaces War Emperor technique, and the Yaoguang Peak's Heavenly Demon Chaos Divine Melody. They were all stored in the Divine Pavilion for talented geniuses to cultivate. The philosophy of the Celestial Palace did not care about one's background or status. Qin Hao's actions could be considered as continuing the orthodoxy on behalf of the seven peak venerables of Tianquan and spreading it to the four regions. During this period, Qin Hao used the divine power of the Elixir deity to gather his fellow disciples who had cultivated in the Divine Palace. Just as Qin Hao had estimated before leaving the Divine Palace, there were more than 300 people. These people were all planted with divine seals and joined the divine guards. They cooperated with Zhan Wu's war god guards and were distributed to the divine pavilions in the four regions. Firstly, they supervised the assessment of the divine pavilions, and secondly, they maintained order in the mortal world. After all, Qin Hao could not always concentrate his divine consciousness in the mortal world. That way, the martial artists in the mortal world would have no privacy, and it would be a burden for Qin Hao. At this time, in the Qin Imperial Palace, a group of people with extraordinary temperaments were sitting at the banquet in the main hall. They were all venerables, and the atmosphere was harmonious. The divine wilderness should have changed its name long ago. Now that Big Brother has become a god, why don't we change it to the Elixir deity continent? Qi Xiaoguo was holding a wine bottle, exuding the smell of alcohol. It's too vulgar and uncultured. Why don't we call it the Elixir deity continent? Yi Shuihan picked up a mouthful of food and chewed as he muttered, "No, no, no. That won't do, that won't do. It's all thanks to Big Brother Zhan Wu's painstaking efforts that the Lord has today. In my opinion, it should be called the Danwu continent." Qing Qing glanced at Xiaogua. This guy had followed Master for a lifetime. Why did it seem that he could not do anything except eat? "Sunset, the Danzhan continent is decided," Zhan Lang said firmly, as if he would not be polite to anyone who did not agree with him. "The Heaven Do continent is not bad." Tian Do stroked his chin and muttered to himself. Gradually, the group of people became noisy over the name. "Ah Wu, how about the Danzhan continent?" Qin Hao sat in the main seat and smiled as he asked Zhan Wu, who was beside him. Zhan Wu maintained a stiff expression and said, "We should remove the divine wilderness and change the name. The Danzhan continent is very suitable." "Not good," Qin Qing was right just now. "No matter what, we have to bring your name along." Qin Hao felt that it was too selfish to call it the Danzhan continent. "Danzhan God? That sounds good." Zhan Wu insisted. "No, no." Qin Hao shook his head. "If I say it's okay, then it's okay. I'm the god. You have to listen to me." Qin Hao slammed the table and stood up. The Dao ancestor and the Phoenix clan ancestor looked at each other. They were speechless as they watched the two giants at the top of the continent argue. "How about the divine continent?" At this moment, a fat man in the banquet spoke. Instantly, everyone's gazes shifted over. "If it doesn't sound good, we can change it." Hai Dafu met the gazes of the flawless great emperors. He really wanted to leave. "Fatty, you're a genius. You can think of such a bad name." Yu Feng held it in for a few breaths and finally burst out laughing. The laughter in the hall immediately made Hai Dafu blush. "The divine continent, I think it's pretty good. Ah Wu, what do you think?" Qin Hao tasted it. "As long as you think it's good." Zhan Wu still maintained that poker face. "Boring." The more Qin Hao looked at Zhan Wu, the more bored he became. This guy was not like this before. He fell into the mortal world and cultivated for a lifetime. Did he become stupid? "Divine Master, Sunset War God, the naming of the continent is not urgent. Since you summoned me here today, you must have something important to tell me." The Dao ancestor opened his mouth. He was not being perfunctory. His expression was solemn, as if he had predicted something important. "Senior is a senior after all. Even the heavenly Tao cannot escape your prying." Qin Hao nodded and sat back down. He said, "In the ancient era of primordial spirits, the 14 great gods and the 7 demon kings joined forces to fight back, resulting in the collapse of the divine path. I think everyone is curious as to what triggered this war of the gods and caused the death of the god." The atmosphere in the hall suddenly quieted down. Everyone held their breaths and looked at the pill god. They still remembered that during the battle at Sunset Peak, the old Sunset War god had said that the experts from the outer domain were plotting something in the divine wilderness, but no one knew what it was. The power of the original realm. Zhan Wu took over the topic. The power of the original realm? The Dao ancestor was puzzled. What power is that? Actually, this world is not what you see. The divine wilderness is just a drop in the ocean. In the wilderness, there are many plains like the 4 regions of the divine wilderness. They are also called continents. Zhan Wu said slowly. The continents formed an even wider plain. The divine path called it a world. Just like a small sect under an overlord that needed to be ruled by a supreme expert, many continents outside the divine wilderness were also under the rule of an extremely powerful divine master. But the divine wilderness was an exception. Because it was the original realm, it could also be called the origin of the wilderness. Chapter 1958. Why am I getting more and more confused? Feng Lan said embarrassedly. It was too profound for her to understand. You don't need to understand too much. You just need to understand that the Divine Desolate's heavenly Tao is different from other planes and realms. It is an independent entity. The life forms under the heavenly Tao not only grow quickly, but their abilities are also close to perfection. Zhan Wu's expression was solemn. In other words, the world outside the Divine Desolate's heavenly Tao isn't perfect? The Phoenix clan ancestor asked tentatively. You can understand it that way. Qin Hao nodded and said, the original realm retains the most perfect Tao will from the beginning of the Eldritch world. The heavenly Tao of the other planes has flaws. Because of the flaws in the heavenly Tao, the living beings born also have flaws. As everyone knows, the origin souls of the Divine Desolate's martial artists are divided into ranks. The higher the rank, the stronger the individual can display. Even monstrous people can challenge those of a higher rank. The life forms born from the perfect heavenly Tao are like high-level origin souls, while the life forms of the other planes are born with inferior constitutions and are innately weak. Can you understand this explanation? Hiss. All the Supremes gasped. They didn't expect the Divine Desolate's heavenly Tao to be so powerful. They lived under such a superior heavenly Tao without knowing it. So they want to seize the Divine Desolate's heavenly Tao and move their people here. They want to use our heavenly Tao to perfect their bloodline and Tao intent. Uncle Ji was shocked. That's right. By controlling the power of the origin realm, the descendants of the Outlanders can live here and obtain innately perfect power. This way they will be stronger than the other planes. Zhan Wu had once joined the army of the Outlanders, so he was clear about the plan. However, the Outlanders didn't expect that the origin spirit 14 gods would be so powerful even though their divine grade wasn't high. Even with the participation of many planes, they still couldn't take down the Divine Desolate. Dragon Man Yen Ming rose up and killed a large number of gods. May I ask War God what the outside world is like? Sword Master Hyun Ing asked curiously. There are fire domain, water domain, ice domain, sword domain. For example, the fire domain plane. There are only flames there. All life forms can only use flames and can't sense other elements. Zhan Wu said. This was an innate disadvantage. As for the divine wilderness, it gathered the power of all living things in the wilderness. The heavenly Tao was filled with all sorts of elements. Even though warriors had different attributes after they were born, for example, those who were proficient in fire would have very powerful fire spells, they lived under the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness, so they could more or less sense other elements. Therefore, they had a certain resistance. The world outside the heavenly path of the divine wilderness did not have any resistance to other elements. Perhaps their flames or swordsmanship were very powerful, but when they suddenly encountered a power they had never encountered before, it was very difficult for them to adapt in a short period of time. Some powerful cultivators even failed miserably and were killed by weaker cultivators from other planes. Of course, due to the purity of the elements, if one were to cultivate the flames to the extreme, the power would be extremely terrifying. Take Flawless Head for example. The true extreme sword master was a pure sword heart and sword soul. In the way of the sword, Flawless Head's strength could be said to be one of a kind. There was basically no one who could compete with him. Once a cultivator with such an extreme nature refined his will to a certain extent, he would be like a god of slaughter. Tiando and Tai Hui were also like him, including Yi Shuihan and Chen Wanqin. Is it? Take Emperor Yuan of the Divine Desolate. If he didn't die prematurely, under normal circumstances, he would be able to become an emperor in at least 300 years to 600 or 700 years. He could rely on the power of the heavenly path to become an emperor. But the other planes need to spend twice as much or even more time to reach this step. Qin Hao saw the situation of many planes through the memories of several reincarnations. The Divine Desolate's heavenly path was a perfect heavenly path. Cultivation here was faster, and the Tao was all-encompassing. In the world outside the Divine Desolate, the heavenly path was flawed. Living beings were born inferior, and their cultivation was extremely slow. But because the planes were different in size, the Divine Desolate was relatively small. The number of living beings in a large world outside was immeasurable. Therefore, the number of experts in the outer realms might be higher than in the Divine Desolate. Today, I finally know what it means to live in fortune without appreciating it. Holy Emperor Jiang chuckled. The Divine Desolate that they despised was an immeasurable treasure in the eyes of outsiders. There aren't many heavenly paths like the Divine Desolate. As far as I know, there are only 3 in the Primordial Desolate. Zhan Wu thought about the countless years that had passed. He had wandered from place to place, and he had witnessed many world-ending battles. A divine master could destroy all the living beings in an entire plane with a single thought. It was extremely tragic, and it was much more cruel than the Battle of Sunset Peak. There are 3 in the original realm. We are not the only one, Ocean Destroyer said in surprise. To be precise, there are only 2 left. The Divine Desolate and… Qin Hao looked at Zhan Wu. My and Ao's hometown, the Archean realm. As for the third, it had been completely destroyed by a realm war launched by a divine king. That's why you have to grow as quickly as possible. While the seal of the 14 origin spirit gods is still there, you have to do your best to prove your divinity. Otherwise, if the alien army attacks again, Qin Hao and I won't be able to protect this heavenly Tao. All of you will be enslaved or even completely wiped out. Zhan Wu's words were suffocating. He was not trying to scare Uncle Changji and the others, but a tragedy could happen at any time. In the third original realm, because the native gods were too weak, they were unable to protect their heavenly path in the face of a tyrannical divine king. In the end, they had no choice but to perish with the heavenly path. The Divine Desolate might follow in the footsteps of others. I estimate that in less than 3,000 years, the seal of all living beings will dissipate. Now that I control the heavenly path and borrow the power of all living beings, I can maintain the seal for another 1,000 years. After 4,000 years, the aura of the Divine Desolate will once again drift to the outer realm. You do not have much time left. Qin Hao faced the crowd. This was also the reason why he had placed the imperial technique of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace in the Divine Pavilion. If they did not become stronger as soon as possible and strive to create a few gods, after 4,000 years, this place might not exist anymore. Of course, Qin Hao had enough ability to take some people away, but for the living beings of the Divine Desolate, there was no chance of survival. Qin Hao, tell me, what realm are you at now? At this time, Shouwuk's sharp eyes focused on him. He did not believe in the so-called God. Controlling the heavenly path was at most another realm. Qin Hao and Zhan Wu were not people of the Divine Desolate, so they could leave. However, Shouwuk was a swordsman of the Divine Desolate, and he would absolutely not allow the tragedy of the destruction of the realm to happen. Heavenly Wheel Realm. Qin Hao replied seriously. Above the Emperor Realm was the Heavenly Wheel Realm. After saying this, a ball of extremely bright divine light burst out from Qin Hao's body. Suddenly, endless heavenly power descended, and the hall was suffocating for a moment. Everyone could clearly see that there was a wheel light flowing in Qin Hao's body, replacing all the meridians and dantian in his body. It began to operate with the wheel light. Look carefully. His heavenly wheel is a perfect heavenly wheel. The wheel light is flawless, while the heavenly wheels of the gods in the outer realm are not complete. If they encounter a perfect heavenly wheel like Qin Hao, those of the same level will be killed immediately. Zhan Wu solemnly reminded everyone. Even if two gods of the same level were to face a perfect heavenly wheel, an incomplete heavenly wheel would still be crushed like an emperor. This was the embodiment of the power of the original realm. Only the original realm's heavenly path could give birth to a perfect heavenly wheel. Whoosh! As the radiance of the heavenly wheel dissipated from Qin Hao's body, everyone in the hall gasped for breath. Their backs were drenched in sweat. Everyone deeply engraved the scene in their minds and firmly remembered it. Qin Hao's heavenly wheel was a perfect heavenly wheel. Chapter 1959. The heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness could directly create a perfect heavenly wheel expert. It was not impossible for other planes, but it required a lot of effort to perfect the heavenly wheel. For example, divine masters controlled the heavenly Tao of several planes and obtained the faith of thousands of different living beings. Only a few divine masters had perfect heavenly wheels. However, this period of torment was too long, unlike the divine wilderness heavenly Tao. Once one attained divinity here, they would have perfect heavenly wheels. It was basically impossible for ordinary gods in the outside world to achieve this, and divine masters could only perfect their heavenly wheels. Only divine kings' heavenly wheels were perfect. This was the reason for the outbreak of the ancient divine wars. The divine wilderness heavenly Tao could not only perfect the heavenly wheels, but also reproduce the divine king's original realm. How could the other divine masters not be tempted? Therefore, the 14 origin spirit gods risked their lives to protect the divine wilderness and prevent the original realm's heavenly Tao from being controlled by other divine masters. Divine King, what kind of realm is that? Sea Urchin trembled as he looked forward to it. Qin Hao waved his hand. Don't think too much. Divine kings are very far away from you. Attain divinity first. Sea Urchin, White Emperor, and the other primes were still trapped in true self and flawless. They had yet to attain nirvana. Nirvana was already difficult for the other thearchs. In order to attain nirvana, Qin Hao gave up his dharma body. In order to attain nirvana, the sunset battle god swallowed the old Zhan Wu's Tao intent. In order to let Shou-Wuk comprehend nirvana, Shadowless gave up her last chance of rebirth and planted her sword soul into his soul, fusing with Shou-Wuk's Tao intent to complement each other. Nirvana was easier said than done. Each of the 4 realms of the Tao of Emperor was a prerequisite for attaining divinity. One had to pass nirvana and derive nomological laws to control the heavenly Tao. Furthermore, if one succeeded in nirvana and advanced to the 9 realms of laws, it would be enough to make Sea Urchin and the others suffer. How could becoming a god be so simple? Divine masters, divine kings, these were existences that even Qin Hao and Zhan Wu envied and feared. Supreme God, now that we have comprehended the vastness of divine will, the heavenly Tao can't see it. What does it have to do with the divine Tao? The Judgment Hall Master, Xing Yu, asked. You can understand the heavenly Tao as a kind of will. It carries the hopes of all living beings in a plane. If you want to become a god and wield the heavenly Tao, you must first obtain the recognition of the heavenly Tao. Qin Hao explained for Xing Yu. What about the laws? Xiaogua asked. Thump. Qin Hao's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Xiaogua and said, Ask yourself. Qin Hao had been stumped by the question of laws and faith for a long time. It was only at that moment that he understood why Zhou Wudao didn't say it directly. It was because it would affect the attribute of his divine power and the recognition of the heavenly Tao. This matter had to be completely comprehended by the individual before the heavenly Tao could accept it. It's too difficult. How about this, Old White? Disperse your sovereign spirit and let your will fuse with me. Perhaps I can become a god this way. For the future of the continent and to protect the power of our original realm, sacrifices are inevitable. Don't worry, after I become a god, I will erect a statue of you for the world to remember. Ocean Walker patted White Emperor's shoulder. Get lost, White Emperor said angrily. He shook his shoulder and pushed Ocean Walker away. He glared at Ocean Walker fiercely. Why didn't Ocean Walker disperse his sovereign spirit? If he helped him, he could also erect a statue of Ocean Walker. Nirvana isn't the only way. The nirvana of the Tao is also considered nirvana. Qin Hao said. Did you hear that? As long as you are willing to destroy your cultivation and comprehend the profound meaning of nirvana, you might also become a god. For the future of the continent and to protect the power of our original realm, you might as well give it a try. White Emperor said to Ocean Walker. Get lost. Ocean Walker left White Emperor's side angrily and sat in another seat. Destroying one's sovereign spirit was easy to say. What if he couldn't comprehend it? The first-generation Grand Ancestor became a cripple. Becoming a god isn't done overnight. Everyone, don't go astray. I won't care when the time comes. Qin Hao smiled at everyone. With his ability, he could naturally use the heavenly Tao to forcefully help the emperors achieve nirvana. However, doing so would be beneficial and harmful. Remember what happened today in your hearts. Don't spread it around. Zhan Wu reminded them. War God, don't worry. We understand. Everyone promised. The divine wilderness was the original realm. Although ordinary people wouldn't understand, if the news of the fall of the gods was made public, it would definitely cause panic and turmoil in the four regions. The scene would definitely be more violent than the birth of the evil calamity. Perhaps before the experts from other planes attacked, the divine wilderness would have already frightened countless creatures to death. The banquet continued. Qin Hao didn't have much time in the mortal world. He had promised not to interfere with the lower world. After this banquet, he would leave the East Continent and go to a place where no one could find him to cultivate. Although he had become a god and forged the heavenly wheel, he hadn't condensed the Lunli of the heavenly wheel. The strength of the Lunli was related to the level of combat strength and was extremely important. Seeing that the banquet was coming to an end, Showuk stood up and came to Qin Hao's side. He looked at him and said, Qin Hao, I have something to ask of you. I have thought about it for a long time. Can you revive Senior Juing? Qin Hao didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave Showuk a few breaths of time before asking, Are you sure? He could revive Juing, but he needed to extract Juing's sword spirit from Wuk's divine soul. This would cause great harm to Showuk and might even reverse his swordsmanship. No. Hyun-Ing stood up from the banquet and looked at Showuk with a serious expression. Seeing that the other party was extremely insistent, he sighed and said, Wuk, my senior brother gave up his last chance to revive because he wanted to help you become the sword god. Just now, the supreme god and the war god said that the heavenly axiom will be in danger in the future. You should work harder to cultivate and protect the heavenly axiom in the divine wilderness. Don't let my senior brother's efforts go to waste. After Hyun-Ing finished speaking, he left the hall alone. His back looked very sad. He also wanted to revive Juing, but the sword spirit had already merged with Wuk's divine soul. That was Juing the Great's wish. They should respect it. Did you hear that? Qin Hao patted Wuk's shoulder twice. You have already entered the Nirvana realm and are not far from deriving laws. If you extract that sword spirit now, how confident do you think you are in condensing a law? Not even 10%, Showuk said frankly. He was also very clear that once he lost Juing's sword spirit, his control over sword intent would definitely not be as strong as it was now. Not to mention condensing a law, his realm might even regress. Go, don't let down Juing and Hyun-Ing. The divine wilderness needs its own sword god. Qin Hao said. Before I become a god, I will come and find you again. Showuk nodded and turned into a stream of swords, flying out of the hall and into the void. You can leave. Zhan Wu ordered them to leave. He also needed to quickly cultivate the unreal battle scripture. He felt that Qin Hao had the intention to leave the divine wilderness. He needed to raise his realm before that and accompany Dendi. We will take our leave. The emperors stood up and bowed, heading out of the hall. Supreme Divinity, did you extend my life? The Tao ancestor stopped and secretly transmitted his voice. Not only does the divine wilderness need a sword body, but it also needs a Tao god. Qin Hao's consciousness descended into the Tao ancestor's mind. Aren't you violating the will of the heavenly Tao by doing this? The Tao ancestor was speechless. Qin Hao said that he would not interfere with the lower realm, but he did not say anything and took the power of the heavenly Tao to extend his life. My will is the heavenly Tao. Qin Hao chuckled. He did say that he would not interfere with the affairs of the lower realm, but that was for others. He naturally had to care about his own people. As long as he did not die, the Tao ancestor would have infinite life. He would have to pile up a Tao god. It was not for anything else, but for Eastern Sky and Shirmu. Eastern Sky, Shirmu, you can be envious. The Tao ancestor sighed and turned into a ray of light, flying to the south. This was probably the reason why Eastern Sky and Shirmu sent Qin Hao to the Tao mountain. Back then, he protected Dendi. Today, the pill god reversed the heavenly Tao to extend his life and help him prove his divinity. This person is not simple. Doesn't his ability resemble that of a divine king from the Archean realm? Zhan Wu leaned closer to Qin Hao and whispered. Qin Hao thought hard for a moment before nodding his head. Indeed, it's very similar. Maybe we can create an existence as tyrannical as that. It was not empty talk. The divine wilderness was on the same level as the heavenly Tao of the Archean realm. War God, have we met before? Stunned, a voice floated over. Zhan Wu looked down and found that Xing Yu of the Judgment Hall was standing at the entrance of the hall, looking over. Ridiculous. Who are you to be worthy of meeting me? Zhan Wu said bluntly. Although his words were unpleasant, he did not have any ill intentions. I was mistaken. Xing Yu bowed and apologized, then stepped into the air and left. Was there really a mistake? Why did he feel a faint sense of familiarity from Zhan Wu, as if they had really met before? Chapter 1960. Why didn't you tell Xing Yu the truth? Qin Hao asked with a smile. I really don't know him well. Zhan Wu answered honestly. In order to investigate Lei Jiu, he had been the Lord of Thunder Plains for a while and taught Lei Jiao. During that time, he only preached through Emperor's will and did not appear in public. Lei Jiao was talented and stood out from many disciples. His thunder doctrine was rare and the elders recommended him to be the Lord's personal disciple. At that time, Lei Jiu was not in the orthodoxy. Zhan Wu took the opportunity to hide behind the scenes and pretend to be the Lord's Taoist body. He secretly found out some secret. He suspected that Lei Jiu was one of the 12 villains. Lei Jiao was taught by him, but in Xing Yu's impression, he was the Lord of Thunder Plains and had nothing to do with Zhan Wu. As he expected, Lei Jiu was one of the 12 villains. Unfortunately, although he was dead, the Sunset Battle Immortal still did not know who he was. Perhaps only Qin Hao knew this secret. After the banquet, Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle Immortal left the East Continent and no longer cared about the mortal world. The Western Liang army entered Daqin and the empire was ruled by the Qin people. Qin Yu was the crown prince and Haidafu was the prime minister. In addition to supervising the divine pavilion, Tiando also became the protector divine general of the Qin people. With Tiando guarding here, Qin Hao was very relieved. After all, this guy was able to compete with Wuk and his strength was extraordinary. In Western Liang, after the Qin people left, the empire was changed to Western Qi. Xiaogua was enthroned as the emperor by God's will and cooperated with Luo Shui. In the southern region and northern borderline there were not many changes. Because of the migration of the Si tribe and the Piku tribe, at first there was some panic and turmoil. However, the local people had always been tough. As time passed, the people gradually adapted and accepted the two ancient tribes. There were also some changes in the 5 realms of the East continent. Zhou Wudao brought his entire clan to the god-bearing island, abandoning their homeland and using the demon domain as a foundation to establish the demon god empire. From then on, the power of the demon Dao would be passed down for generations. Zhou Wudao threw the territory of the great Zhou Empire to Mo Xian without any reluctance. This was also expected. The great Zhou dynasty was between the Qin state and Mo Luo. Although Han Lingxian had died, this feeling was still unbearable. It was not as good as the Mo domain, where the emperor was far away. They could do whatever they wanted. The qi of the Mo domain was also suitable for cultivating the power of the Mo Dao. Proud god Li Zhu had regrown the hands he had lost in the battle. Now that the 4 regions were operating under the control of the Elixir god, the Golden Age was even more prosperous. The Divine Pavilion had become the most powerful martial house in the continent. It contained tens of thousands of emperors' techniques and attracted countless handsome people. The sovereigns of the 5 realms predicted that in 1,000 years, the way of the emperor would evolve to the peak of the Yuanling era, and there would be more than 1 million of them. This brought great pressure to the sovereigns, and it also urged them to do their best to become gods. Only by becoming gods would they not be drowned by the way of the emperor and lose their position as sovereigns. In the boundless void, a majestic temple filled with divine light floated quietly. It was like a majestic residence, slowly orbiting the 4 regions, silently watching the people of the lower worlds. The temple was very far from the divine wilderness plain. Even ordinary unblemished cultivators could not reach it. Only people like the Phoenix Grandmaster and the true Extreme Sword Master had the ability to cross the boundless void and come here. This temple was naturally Qin Hao's divine residence. He, Shaohan, Wei Wei, the sunset battle god, Lu Zhugexiu, and Zhan Lang lived in this temple. In the past 100 years, they had not asked about the affairs of the lower world. However, the major events in the 4 regions of the divine wilderness were all under Qin Hao's perception. In the past 100 years, the 4 regions had been peaceful. Although there had been friction between the various forces, most of them had stopped. On the other hand, the Battle Kingdom of the West and the White Moon Pavilion of the Central State had triggered a great war that shook the 4 regions. It had also involved the other overlord forces. The Battle Kingdom, with Prince Chun as the commander, had sent troops to the Central State and fought fiercely with Emperor Bai. In the heat of the battle, both sides had even used the divine seal of the Divine Pavilion, using the divine seal's divine power to engage in a fierce battle of false laws. This battle had alarmed Qin Hao. The battle tower had personally come to the scene to suppress both sides and resolve the battle. It was only later that they found out that Emperor Bai's Divine Pavilion had snatched an extremely outstanding talent from the Battle Kingdom's Divine Pavilion, causing the battle to erupt. When Qin Hao heard this, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not send down a divine decree to blame either side. In the end, he had transferred that person to Tiando of the Qin imperial city, causing Emperor Bai and Jin Chen's efforts to be in vain. In martial arts, it was not enough to just cultivate survival of the fittest. Occasionally, there would be an imperial battle, which was beneficial to the development of martial arts. The strong would live and the weak would die. This was the tacit rule of the heavenly way since ancient times. After this incident, Emperor Bai, who had just entered the unblemished realm, immediately went into seclusion to try to break through to the Nirvana realm. He swore that he would not defeat Jin Chen and would never be a sovereign again. He also took the initiative to give up the control of the Divine Pavilion's divine seal. Jin Chen did the same, and his ruthless words were even more ruthless. Regardless of whether he had reached the Nirvana realm or not, they would fight in 300 years. At that time, whoever lost would have to kneel down and be a grandson. When the letter of challenge reached the ears of the other sovereigns, Feng Lan and Tu Hai burst out laughing in front of their disciples. They did not have the bearing of a sovereign at all. At this moment, divine light enveloped the divine hall, and a majestic heavenly way aura surged from within. Qin Hao was meditating and cultivating. On his body, terrifying flames were burning. It was as if he had become the fire source of the entire plane just by sitting there. The power of the flames permeated the lower worlds, nurturing endless fire creatures. Wielding the heavenly way, forging the heavenly wheel. The meridians and dantian of the heavenly wheel realm were replaced by the light of the great path. The heavenly wheel was divided into 4 types: mortal grade, divine grade, celestial grade, and perfect grade. The higher the grade of the heavenly wheel, the stronger the power of the heavenly way it contained, and the stronger the divine power it could release. But at this level, it was not enough to forge a heavenly wheel. The heavenly wheel had to be filled with attributes to continue to increase its combat power. It was like filling empty blood vessels with blood. Only when the blood surged and exploded would the power be strong enough. At this moment, Qin Hao was about to condense the flame Lunli. Flame was the foundation of the survival of the Alchemy Lord clan in the ancient world. Only when their flame was strong enough could they refine the ideal elixir. The heavenly way of the divine wilderness retained the power of the original realm. It was a complete heavenly way. The red lotus flame that was nurtured was very domineering. In the untainted realms, the red lotus flame could be called the best of the best, unless it encountered the flame of the Dragon King. Otherwise, there was almost no strange flame that could compete with it. In the past, I thought that the flame of the Dragon King was just a name. Now it seems that it really exists. Yan Ming is a cultivator who combined the human and dragon races. He dabbled in alchemy and refined the Great Void Cauldron. The flame of the Dragon King must be on him. Yan Ming did not refine the Red Lotus. It was not that the Red Lotus was not strong. Obviously, there was a better choice. Qin Hao analyzed the dragon power contained in the blood essence that Yen Long's dragon bloodline should belong to the fire dragon race. It was impossible for the fire dragon race leader to say that Yan Ming had nothing to do with the creation of such a powerful being. In the divine wilderness, Yan Ming was like Qin Hao. His heavenly wheel was also at the perfect level. Together with his powerful dragon power and the flame of the Dragon King that was nurtured by the perfect heavenly way, it was no wonder that the heavenly wheel cultivators from other planes could not take down the divine wilderness. In a one-on-one battle, almost no one in the heavenly wheel realm was Yan Ming's opponent, unless the cultivators from the ancient world came. Not to mention others, even Qin Hao did not have much confidence in facing Yan Ming. Then, the other half of Yan Ming's human bloodline should belong to some ancient alchemy clan on the continent. Qin Hao did not dare to say that in terms of fighting, but in terms of alchemy, he definitely had a higher chance of winning. The venerable alchemy clan still had this much confidence. Wisps of red flames continued to spread across the heavenly wheel. It was as if hot blood had been poured into his veins and gradually covered his entire body. Counting from the day of the divine wilderness, Qin Hao had spent 100 years to condense the flame Lunli. Until today. Finally, the flame Lunli completely merged with the heavenly wheel and reached every part of his divine body. Boom! The area where the temple was located seemed to have an invisible vibration. Suddenly, the sky emitted endless heavenly way flames. Every particle floating in the air seemed to contain the power of fire that could burn all things. Looking at the sky from the lower world, under the night sky, the temple was like a burning star. It was spectacular. At the same time, the fire elemental cultivators of the 4 domains clearly felt this power. They were shocked to find that the power of fire in the spiritual chi was stronger than before. To fire elemental cultivators like them, it was extremely beneficial. At this time, the one who felt it the most was the sun god of the southern domain. He suddenly woke up from his sleep. Wearing a sleeping robe, he pushed open the window of his palace and stared blankly at the burning star in the sky. He said in his sleep, "Fire god." After becoming the pill god, the power of the heavenly way flames suddenly increased. Almost every fire elemental cultivator's consciousness felt the arrival of the fire god's will. "Congratulations!" Zhan Wu took a step forward and looked at Qin Hao, who was covered in tumbling blood flames. He saw that in Qin Hao's heavenly wheel there was a tiny line of fire that circled around his body. It circulated along with the heavenly wheel's radiance, resonating with the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao had cultivated the divine power of fire. "There's nothing to congratulate. Wu, I want to go out and take a look. Even if I have to stand very far away, I want to see the position of the primeval realm." Qin Hao slowly opened his eyes. 2 flames flashed in his golden eyes. "Okay," Zhan Wu said casually. "You know what I mean. I want to leave the divine wilderness and go to other planes," Qin Hao said solemnly. Zhan Wu fell silent. After a short while, he said, "In 200 years, I will be able to achieve perfection in the law of battle intent and prove my divinity again. At that time, let's go together." "I'm not a child." Qin Hao smiled unhappily. He just wanted to go out and take a look. He didn't want to fight with the heavenly wheel realm cultivators of other planes. "I've worked hard for a long time to bring you back to where you are today." Zhan Wu lowered his head and said. He didn't doubt Qin Hao's strength. Under normal circumstances, no heavenly wheel realm cultivator could hurt Qin Hao unless he encountered a divine master expert, let alone keep him. However, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried. "I won't be far from the divine wilderness. I'll be waiting for you in the Dongwang realm," Qin Hao said. When he said this, the flames in his eyes flashed with a sharp luster, containing a strong killing intent. Zhan Wu's body trembled slightly. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but changed his original meaning. He nodded and said, "Okay, before I arrive, don't fight with him. I have to kill him with my own hand." Zhan Wu clenched his fists, making a terrible creaking sound. The master of the Dongwang realm, the Dongwang realm. He knew that Qin Hao wanted to avenge him. However, this hatred needed to be avenged by the sunset battle god himself. Chapter 1961. Zhan Wu suffered a lot in order to stabilize Qin Hao's soul that was on the verge of collapse and find a suitable body for rebirth. Dongwang, the master of the primordial realm, Dongwang, had an extremely unpleasant incident with Zhan Wu. Because of this, the sunset battle god was greatly humiliated. The pride in the bones of the tribes of the primordial realm was stronger than that of other heavenly wheel experts. This was the innate nature of their race. Dongwang, as a god of the lower realm, had trampled on the dignity of the young master of the primordial realm battle god tribe. In the past, Zhan Wu had countless ways to make Dongwang regret. In short, this grudge had to be avenged. Even if Zhan Wu forgot, Qin Hao would not allow it. Dendi had to take revenge, especially after awakening the celestial source and recovering the fragmented memories of his first life. He believed that Dongwang's actions could not be forgiven easily. Dongwang has perfected his heavenly wheel and is a divine master. Not to mention now, even if we were at our strongest, we might not be able to defeat him even if we worked together. "Don't be stupid and impulsive," Zhan Wu warned heavily. "Don't worry, I won't," Qin Hao said with a smile. If a worker wanted to do a good job, he had to sharpen his tools first. He controlled the heavenly Tao and had just condensed his Lunli. Naturally, he could not directly clash with a divine master. He would wait for the right time. Zhan Wu nodded. "Are you bringing anyone else on this trip?" Honor will come with me. Also, I want to bring Sword Master True Extreme out to train, Qin Hao said. As for the others, there was no need. Xiao Han has the bloodline of the god race. You want to investigate her background? Zhan Wu looked at Qin Hao. Xiao Han's mother was not from the divine wilderness. The sunset battle god could naturally feel it. This is probably her father's wish. Qin Hao sighed. Uncle Xiao must have been looking forward to this day for a long time. That's good. If possible, we should try to maintain this relationship. If Xiao Han's mother is willing to help, it will be beneficial for us to return to the primordial realm in the future. Zhan Wu and Qin Hao indeed needed the strength of the other god race. As for bringing Sword Master True Extreme out of the divine wilderness, he was a rare talent. His way of the sword was pure and flawless. Now that he had entered the Nirvana realm and he had started condensing the laws of the sword way of the sword. It was only Nirvana level to become a god, proving to the divine heaven SS true, and even the divine of the Tao's levels. Of God, perfect level to Woods perfectses, Lunleys of the S's, to its heavenly heavens, S of the god. I'm going to the northern frontier, Qin Hao said. There was no time to lose. Since he had made the decision, he had to act as soon as possible. Suddenly, his body was filled with divine light. Countless fire particles flew and disappeared in front of Zhan Wu. His aura descended upon Liaodu in the northern border. Xiao Han was with him. Martial Emperor Palace. The divine light of the heavenly path fell. The continent's supreme god, Qin Hao, arrived with Princess Jingyue. The guards and maids in the palace all knelt down in fear. Why didn't you greet me? I was just talking to Sister Weiwei. Xiao Han followed Qin Hao to Xiao Yi's residence. Along the way, both sides of the road were filled with kneeling figures. Just now, she had been swept away by Qin Hao. Xiao Han didn't even have time to react. It was too sudden. Qin Hao was being very impolite. My matter is more important. Qin Hao smiled. As they chatted, the two arrived at Xiao Yi's residence. At this moment, Xiao Yi, Qin Hao's parents, and the warlord Duan Zhanfei were all in the palace. When they saw the divine light descending from the sky, they immediately stood up to welcome it. Greetings, Supreme God. Everyone bowed respectfully. Qin Hao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He immediately cupped his hands and bowed. Father-in-law, father, mother, warlord, we don't have to be so polite. That won't do. You are a god. Sitting on this position, you are the father of all life. Xiao Yi's face was solemn. He had to show the necessary etiquette. If the other overlords saw this, they would say that they didn't respect the gods. Son, you don't have to feel that it's troublesome. This is a separate matter. Isn't it good? Tang Rong said. All right, as long as you are happy. Qin Hao was helpless. Let's enter the palace. Why did you suddenly come here today? At least send a strand of divine intent to inform us, so that I can arrange for the servants to prepare. Xiao Yi waved at Gongsun Chongqing and hurriedly gave him a few instructions. Gongsun Chongqing trembled as he jogged away. Soon, a large number of palace maids followed behind Gongsun Chongqing as they carried bejeweled nectar and delicious delicacies into the palace and placed them on the banquet table. Father-in-law, I would like to leave the divine wilderness for a period of time. Qin Hao didn't have any food. He looked at Xiao Wudi. What did you say? Leave the divine wilderness? Tang Rong shouted and stood up in shock. Qin Dingtian pulled Tang Rong back and said, Why are you shouting so loudly? Don't let the overlords of the four regions hear you. If the overlord of the heavenly Tao left the continent and people with ulterior motives found out, they would take the opportunity to cause trouble. Mother, don't be nervous. Wu will temporarily take care of the four regions for me. Even if I leave, there shouldn't be any idiots who will try to anger the sunset battle god. Qin Hao's expression was relaxed. Zhan Wu didn't have a good personality like him. that He would kill if he didn't agree with him. Furthermore, Zhan Wu was about to become a god again. The divine wilderness would also give birth to a god who could control war. Why are you leaving? Xiao Yi asked. I'm going to train in other planes. My cultivation has reached a bottleneck. It will be difficult for me to make any progress if I stay in the divine wilderness. Also, Qin Hao looked at Xiao Han. About the crown princess. Xiao Yi's heart tightened as if something was strangling it. Then, he sighed and said, There's no harm in speaking frankly. We are all on the same side. Duan Zhanfei was his subordinate and close friend. Gongsun Changxing watched him and Xiao Han grow up together and was an old servant of the Xiao clan. Qin Hao and Tang Rong were Qin Dingtian's parents. There were no secrets between them that couldn't be said openly. Since that's the case, I'll be frank. Mother-in-law isn't from the divine wilderness. When I go out to train, I'll investigate her whereabouts. I believe this is also a knot in your heart and a long-cherished wish, right? Qin Hao looked at Xiao Yi with a sincere gaze. The husband and wife had been separated for several hundred years. If they were ordinary people, they would have turned into bones long ago. Even if an emperor had a lifespan of 1,000 years, he would still have worries in his heart. How could he let it go? Furthermore, Xiao Yi was a man with a strong temperament. He wasn't as cold as the other emperors who didn't care about family ties. Qin Hao. Xiao Yi's eyes were red. He stood up from his seat and gradually bent his knees. He trembled as he knelt towards Qin Hao. In an instant, everyone in the hall was shocked. Father, you don't have to do this. Xiao Han left his seat and walked forward to help Xiao Yi up. Xiao Yi waved his hand at Xiao Han. Seeing Qin Hao's awkward expression, he considered his son-in-law's situation and didn't really kneel down. He sat back down and said tearfully, That's right. This place is indeed my concern and also my long-cherished wish. Han Er's birth mother isn't from the divine wilderness but from another plane of existence. If you can find her whereabouts and bring her back so that our family can reunite, even if I, Xiao Yi, die immediately, I will have no regret. Large drops of tears fell from his face. Emperors were battered by hundreds of battles, but they didn't shed tears. At this moment, Xiao Yi found it difficult to control his emotions. It wasn't that he didn't shed tears easily, but that he hadn't been hurt to the core. There was nothing more moving than a tough man with tears flowing down his face. Xiao Yi had looked forward to this for hundreds of years. He had once thought that there was no hope in this life. He had held the Northern Frontier Imperial Martial Competition to test whether Qin Hao was sincere towards Xiao Han or not. Secondly, he had the intention of choosing the continent's strongest genius as his son-in-law. If he wasn't so powerless, how could he, a dignified emperor, entrust his hopes to someone else? Now, Qin Hao hadn't let Xiao Han down, nor had he disappointed Xiao Yi. He had truly proven the heavenly Tao and become a god. He had even said that he would leave the divine wilderness to find his wife's whereabouts. This made Xiao Yi feel that the greatest happiness in his life was meeting Xiao Han's mother. His greatest fortune was recognizing Qin Hao as his son-in-law. Father-in-law, you don't need to be sad. If possible, I will do my best to bring mother-in-law back. However, there are some things that I still need to ask you. You don't need to ask my father, because I know far more than him and in much more detail. Xiao Han's eyes were red. If she had known that Qin Hao had come to the northern frontier for this, she would have told him everything that Qin Hao wanted to know. Then, she wouldn't have had to watch her father suffer. Qin Hao was stunned. You undid the divine Tao seal on Moonfall? Xiao Yi looked at his daughter in shock. It's been solved long ago. Xiao Han smiled sadly. In reality, it was fortunate that her mother's inheritance had protected her throughout this journey. It had resolved many dangers for her and Qin Hao many times, and she had also learned many things from it. Xiao Han knew more about the Crown Prince Consort's surname, family, and innate talent than Xiao Yi. It was my negligence. Qin Hao looked at Xiao Han apologetically. He was afraid that if he suddenly said it, it would make Xiao Han sad. Therefore, in that case, let Han accompany you. Since you left behind the celestial race's sacred artifact, she must have told Xiao Han all the secret. Xiao Yi slowly closed his eyes. In an instant, he seemed to age a lot, as though he had been freed from a shackle. Now, all he wanted was for his wife to return to his side. Other than that, there was nothing else he wanted. Son, when will you be back? Tang Rong walked to Qin Hao's side and seriously looked at Qin Hao's face. It was as though she wanted to remember every detail of his facial features. She was afraid that Qin Hao would never return. Although her cultivation level was limited, she knew what leaving the divine wilderness meant. It was going to another world. Mother, don't worry. I'm a god. With the power of the heavenly Tao, I can return to the divine wilderness with a thought. There won't be any danger. Qin Hao said with a gentle smile. It doesn't matter when you return. In short, remember, don't try to be brave in front of the heavenly Tao. Qin Dingtian stood up and said. Qin Dingtian stood up and warned. He was not a god, but he understood the principle of people having no choice but to lower their heads under the eaves of others. In the territories of other gods, Qin Hao would definitely have some restrictions. I will remember. Qin Hao nodded. You can go. Xiao Yi waved his hand. We old men can't help. Now we have to rely on our son-in-law and daughter for everything. Qin Hao, don't tell me you and Xiao Han. Father, don't be so pessimistic. I will bring mother back. Xiao Han said. Xiao Yi closed his eyes and no longer spoke. The only thing he could do was pray. Or perhaps he wouldn't be able to wait for his wife. Even his daughter and son-in-law might not return. Xiao Han, let's go. Qin Hao felt that the atmosphere was somewhat heavy. He could understand the intense worry in Emperor Zhao's heart. After all, the heavenly will realm was different because of the heavenly Tao. The variables were far greater than the other realms. Divine light filled the air. Qin Hao and Xiao Han left without eating a single delicacy. Chapter 1962. Many extraordinary figures stood at the edge of the heavenly path in the divine wilderness. The sunset battle god, the Tao ancestor, the phoenix patriarch, the four immortal generals of the wave slayer army, Lu, Zhugeqing, and Tiando all looked solemnly at the hazy divine radiance above the heavenly Tao. Invisibly, everyone felt a boundless wave of energy being transmitted back. This was the seal of the Tao world that the 14 primordial spirit gods had set up with their divine origins. Qin Hao had originally planned for the 4 of them to go out and train. Now, there was one more person beside him, Kuang Tang. Muri's spirit was in Xiao Han's body. This way, the number of people in the team increased to 5. You're not bringing me. Bao Er's unhappiness was written all over her pretty face. Xiao Han smiled and pinched her nose, advising, learn Tao arts from Grandpa Tao ancestor properly. Step into the Nirvana realm and cultivate the power of law. Your uncle God of War will naturally bring you to meet your parent. Bao Er's cultivation had reached true self, and there was still room for improvement. If she stayed in the divine wilderness and used the power of the original realm to cross Nirvana, she would be able to forge a perfect heavenly wheel. If not, the Emperor's path would be unstable and easily affected by the heavenly path of other planes. It would reverse the heavenly wheel and lower its level. Be obedient. Qin Hao spoke with the authority of a father. Then, he turned to the great elder and said, I'll have to trouble you during this period. Bao Er has your divine bloodline. She's gifted and intelligent. I believe that it won't be long before she surpasses the supreme of the 5 realms. At that time, I'll be able to relax a lot. The great elder chuckled. Even Grandpa Tao ancestor is starting to dislike me. Humph, I'll ignore you. Bao Er was pleased with the praise. However, the second half of the sentence had a different meaning. Her face darkened and she turned away. Ha ha ha! Everyone laughed. In fact, the great elder's words were not unreasonable. She was the daughter of the ruler of the heavenly path, a true goddess. Anyone would feel pressured by her identity. Supreme divinity, please take care of my sister and brother, the Phoenix clan elder said. When Muri lost her imperial body, Qin Hao used his divine power to forcefully protect her soul so that it would not be melted by the heavenly Tao. Since the last battle against evil, Muri had temporarily stayed in Xiao Han's body. She realized that she could communicate with the heavenly Tao through Xiao Han's psyche power. Her understanding was much clearer than before, which was of great help to her cultivation. Therefore, with Xiao Han's approval, Muri had been lodging here until she reached nirvana. Then, she would find a suitable opportunity to cast a physical body. Because Kuang Tang's innate spiritual sense was incomplete, it was hard for him to control his emotions. Qin Hao had promised to solve this matter, so he should take responsibility and let Kuang Tang follow him. I've already prepared all the materials needed to refine senior sister's body. If she's willing, she can be reborn at any time. It's naturally great that we've encountered even stronger innate spiritual materials during this trip. Tang's situation is more complicated. Don't worry, nothing will happen if she stays by my side. Qin Hao's promise made the Phoenix clan ancestor feel at ease. Go, but remember not to be impulsive. We'll talk about everything after we meet up, Zhan Wu said. Qin Hao nodded. I'll leave the 4 regions to you. Lu, Zhugeqing, and Zhan Lang began to break through to the Nirvana Emperor's path. He believed that before long, when the Sunset Battle God proved himself, a few more false gods would appear on the continent. After everything was arranged, Qin Hao's divine will swept out. Suddenly, the primordial spirit seal that sealed the path world shook violently. Soon, a halo appeared, like a black hole that appeared in the seal. It expanded rapidly, revealing a plain passage. Everyone looked carefully and could faintly see turbulent winds raging outside the passage. The terrifying power seemed to be able to crush everything. Hey, don't you have any other plans to tell me? Tiendo saw that Qin Hao was about to take everyone away and could not help but ask. His eyes flickered. He was rather envious of Shouwuk and even a little jealous. Do your job well in the lower realm. Qin Hao turned his head and smiled strangely at Tiendo. With a wave of his sleeve, a bright divine light enveloped everyone. They turned into a whole body and hid in the passage. Then, the light gradually dimmed until it was completely swallowed by the darkness outside the elemental wilderness. Buzz. At this time, the primordial spirit seal's brilliance surged. The black hole slowly closed and disappeared. Do your job well in the lower realm. I'm just a coolie. Tiendo imitated Qin Hao and muttered angrily. Then, he turned into a ray of emperor light and swept toward the east continent lower realm. In the elemental wilderness, countless shining lights decorated the galaxy. It was vast and magnificent. If one's telekinesis was strong enough, one would be able to sense from afar and see the outlines of countless continents from the lights. At this time, the supreme god of the divine wilderness, Qin Hao, led everyone across the elemental wilderness and moved forward. It's so beautiful. Xiao Han looked at everything around her in amazement. Hiding under the protection of Qin Hao's divine power, she was in a vast and endless galaxy. It turned out that the stars she saw in the divine wilderness were all real. Terrifying. Wuk's feelings were completely different from Xiao Han's. Being in the elemental wilderness turbulence and seeing the myriad of worlds, the scenery was naturally wonderful. However, he could feel that the stars were formed by countless continents. Like the divine wilderness, they had all kinds of living beings. They flowed with majestic spirit chi, which was why they glowed. The stronger the living beings were, the denser the spirit chi in the plane, and the more dazzling the light emitted. Therefore, he could roughly analyze which planes were stronger and which had weaker living beings. When Showuk turned around and looked at the divine wilderness, he was stunned. In his field of vision, it was pitch black. He tried his best to focus his vision, and only then did he faintly see a dot of light flashing in the black tide. It was very weak. If he did not look carefully, he would not have noticed it. Do you know the difference between the divine wilderness and the other planes? Qin Hao's voice sounded from beside him. When his voice faded, the tiny light in Wuk's field of vision completely disappeared, fusing with the darkness. What he saw just now was the most realistic portrayal. Compared to the other planes, the spirit chi radiance emitted by the living beings in the divine wilderness was like a candle's light compared to the sun and moon. It was also like a firefly entering a furnace. The difference was like heaven and earth. Furthermore, there was no light in the vicinity of the divine wilderness. In the endless darkness, the divine wilderness was the only tiny light, as if it had been forgotten and abandoned by the myriad of worlds. There will come a day when we can make it the brightest star in the elemental wilderness, more dazzling than that position. Showuk seemed to be encouraging himself as he pointed in a certain direction. Qin Hao looked over. In the direction head Wu Kei was pointing at, there was an extremely ferocious radiance. The intensity of the radiance was too dazzling. It was like a great sun hanging in the sky, covering an endless area. The starlight there was completely engulfed by the radiance of the great sun. Qin Hao's body trembled uncontrollably. He quietly clenched his fist and replied, "Yes." The majestic sun that covered an endless area of the elemental wilderness was the peak of the myriad of worlds, the primeval world. He and Zhan Wu drifted out from there, drifting about, and finally fell into the last remaining weak light in the endless darkness behind them. "Where are we going now?" Tang Tang asked. "Go there." Qin Hao's finger pointed straight ahead, Dongwang World. Dongwang World was formed by several stars. Every star was guarded by at least one god. Among them, the brightest star in the center was the main realm of Dongwang World, the heavenly Tao that was personally controlled by the god of the East. Dongwang World. Xiao Han muttered to himself as he looked forward. Dongwang World was closest to the divine wilderness, but the brilliance of the few stars added together was not too eye-catching among the myriad of worlds. Dongwang World is a realm that specializes in the power of space. The World Master is called the God of the East, and he is extremely powerful. Qin Hao explained. The power of space had always been one of the most powerful among the myriad of worlds. If it was not limited by natural resources, Dongwang World's power might be even stronger. The power of space should also exist in the way of the sword. Showuk said. In the past, he had heard Qin Hao and Zhan Wu's introduction. Other than the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness and the primeval heavenly Tao, the other realms were lacking in the way of the heavenly Tao, and the cultivators only specialized in one type of power. Therefore, all the living beings in Dongwang World must have cultivated the power of space, and the way of the sword also included space sword technique. But the sword cultivators in Dongwang World are not strong. This time we will pass by there and settle some small matters first. Then I will bring you to a true great world of sword Tao. That great world of sword Tao is the best place for you to prove your divinity as the true extreme sword god. Qin Hao said with a smile. That makes me yearn for it. Showuk's eyes lit up. A great world of sword Tao that could be praised by Qin Hao was definitely one of the top existences in the elemental wilderness. Presumably, the living beings in this world were all extraordinary sword cultivators. Didn't Brother Wu tell you to behave and not cause any trouble? Xiao Han looked at Qin Hao. Passing by to settle some small matters? She had never heard of any small matters from Qin Hao. Moreover, he was always thinking about it. She was afraid that this small matter was not simple. I am passing by to visit an old friend. Don't worry, I am not familiar with the God of the East, so I will not find trouble with him. Zhan Wu is very familiar with him, but unfortunately, Ah Wu did not come. You will know when the time comes. Next, we will go to the Phantom Continent under Dongwang World to return the favor of an old friend. As Qin Hao spoke, his divine energy wrapped around everyone and flew like a ray of light, falling towards a certain star in Dongwang World. Ah Wu and Dongwang World did have enmity, but in Dongwang World, Senior Illusion Sovereign of the Phantom Continent had once taken care of Qin Hao. After 10,000 years, now that Dendi had regained his godhood and forged the Heaven's Wheel, they would naturally pay him a visit. Phantom City. Dongwang World was the main city of the Phantom Continent. There were countless cultivators and experts. Illusion Sovereign, as a god under the God of the East, was in charge of the Phantom Plane. Apart from his strong cultivation, his moral character was respected by the local cultivators. He had the same status as Qin Hao in the Divine Wilderness, an indisputable god of the heavenly Tao. However, he did not consider himself a god. Instead, he established his own sect and took in many disciples, grooming many outstanding people for the Phantom Continent. It was said that there were even geniuses who ascended from Illusion Sovereign's deity Jin to other planes. Illusion Sovereign's influence in the Phantom Continent was extremely high. In the past, when Zhan Wu became a mercenary to help the god of the East conquer the Yuan spirit plane, he stayed under Illusion Sovereign's tutelage. When Illusion Sovereign saw that Qin Hao's soul was damaged, he consumed his divine energy to take out divine materials to stabilize Qin Hao's soul. Back then, Qin Hao did not have the ability to repay this favor. Now that Qin Hao had become a god and became the master of a plane, he naturally had to do his part to see if Senior Illusion Sovereign needed any help. At least, Qin Hao could use the energy of the Divine Wilderness to perfect the Heaven's Wheel for Illusion Sovereign. Although he could not make Illusion Sovereign's Heaven's Wheel perfect, it was still a good thing to perfect it. Chapter 1963. Withdrawing his divine power, Qin Hao and the others descended upon the Phantom Continent and stood in the heavenly path. At that moment, the five of them felt an extremely majestic will of the great path of space flooding over. It surged forcefully into their spiritual souls and merged with their wills. Xiao Han, Wuk, and Crazy Tang trembled slightly under the suppression of this space Tao will. It's normal to feel uncomfortable under the heavenly Tao after leaving the divine wilderness. You will get used to it slowly. Qin Hao explained via voice transmission. Even he would be affected. However, the divine wilderness heavenly Tao belonged to the original realm. It was a perfect heavenly Tao that encompassed everything. Although the other planes had different Tao wills, the divine wilderness could nurture all of them. Wuk, Xiao Han, and Crazy Tang had naturally come into contact with the divine wilderness space Tao will. They would get used to the discomfort they felt now. Moreover, they had the innate ability to accept and be accepted by the phantom heavenly Tao. This was the strength of the original realm. They were able to adapt to the chaos. On the other hand, experts from other planes who came to the Phantom Continent did not have this innate ability. Moreover, the suppression of the heavenly Tao would be even stronger. 10,000 years ago, Qin Hao had passed by here. Although he had some memories, he was not familiar with it. However, as the master of the heavenly Tao, Illusion Sovereign's residence was not difficult to find. Soon, the group arrived at Illusion Sovereign's place. This was a huge palace. It gave people a feeling of grandeur from afar. We are here to visit Illusion Sovereign. Please inform him. In front of the palace gate, Qin Hao spoke to the guards guarding the gate. He is very busy and will not meet outsiders. You can leave. One of the guards glanced at Qin Hao and waved his hand lazily, as if he was dismissing him. I am an old friend of Senior Illusion Sovereign. Lord Divine Guard, please inform him. Qin Hao frowned. Since when did the guards at the arched door become so undisciplined? Moreover, they did not seem to have any respect for Illusion Sovereign. Don't you understand human language? I said he is not free. Scram back to where you came from. Don't disturb my mood. A burly man glared at the cultivators with his ferocious eyes, trying to scare them away. What did you say? Crazed Tang roared as he angrily glared ahead. For better or worse, Qin Hao was the divine desolate's heavenly Tao god. Even if he was in someone else's territory, how could a few small fries dare to shout at a god? Oh, this guy's temper isn't small. Why is he trying to scare us? One of them looked at Kuang Tang with interest, as if he hadn't seen such a situation in a long time. I wonder whose subordinates they are? If you don't scram, I'll throw you out. The burly guard suddenly took a step forward. As soon as he spoke, an unblemished emperor's might descended and pressed down on Feng Tang. Dong! Showuk stepped forward. Sword aura bloomed all over his body and a wisp of sword will shot out. Suddenly, clear crackling sounds were heard in the space, as well as the sound of something shattering. Following that burly guard took several steps back. His expression became ugly as he said, Nirvana experts, you aren't people from the Mirage Plane. Clearly, Wuk's sword will allowed the other party to sense his realm. Furthermore, there were very few Mirage sword cultivators, and Nirvana realm sword cultivators like Showuk did not exist. We have no intention of offending you. We are just here to visit Senior Illusion Sovereign. I hope that everyone can make things convenient. Qin Hao said in a low voice. He could faintly feel that something was amiss. These guards had just called Illusion Sovereign he, and did not address him respectfully. Clearly, they were not people under the heavenly Tao God. We won't see him, a person coldly said. With a hua-la sound, 6 figures lined up in front of the palace gate, blocking the path. At that moment, this space became incomparably oppressive. Many cultivators nearby were attracted over, and more of them were coming over. They were pointing at the two parties who were at daggers drawn. Faintly, there were voices of fear like God Dong Bo and audacious. Since you insist on blocking the path, don't blame me for being impolite. Showuk's voice reverberated through the palace gate. Seeing this, the 6 guards roared out at the same time. They let out lumps of emperor light, and a huge golden bell fell from the void, trying to suppress and swallow Showuk. 1. A powerful sword intent suddenly rumbled out from Showuk's body. His face was tense as he continued to move forward. The Nirvana sword intent mixed with the light particles transformed into a golden sword light. With a boom, it collided with the large bell that was pressing down. In an instant, the large bell shattered and exploded. The 6 people in front of Showuk let out a muffled groan. Their bodies swayed as they retreated a few steps. The sword intent of this sword cultivator was really too strong. Wuk similarly stopped in his tracks. A strand of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He had single-handedly destroyed the Tao intent of 6 flawless experts. Especially when he was suppressed by the heavenly Tao of Mirage, he could not avoid being injured. But it was only a single step. In the next moment, he continued forward with a taut face. He coldly spat out trash. 6 flawless experts with the support of the heavenly Tao energy could not stop an outsider Nirvana expert. In the divine wilderness, this was a disgrace to the flawless realm. If the ones blocking the palace gate were Zhan Lang's group of 4, Zhan Lu and Zhuge Qing, Showuk would definitely not be able to take half a step forward. It could be seen that the people from the Mirage Plane were unreasonably weak. You! The muscular guard covered his chest and angrily said. Facing Showuk, who was getting closer, he could not help but take a few steps back. As the divine guards of the paragon god Dong Bo, they had naturally seen sword cultivators from other planes. But the one in front of them had an exceptionally strong sword intent. They had to admit that they were not his opponent. Stop! At that moment, a dignified voice boomed out from within the palace gate. It broke the stalemate and resolved the unsightly situation of the paragon god Dong Bo's guards. This voice was mixed with a heavenly might. It was like the will of the heavens had descended, forcing others to obey. The people under Dong Bo are looking down on the old man more and more. Since you are my old friend, you should let him in. Or do you want to force the old man to personally come out and welcome you? Illusion Reverend's dignified voice pressed down. After hearing this, the expressions of the paragon god Dong Bo's guards changed. The human wall took the initiative to disperse. Come in. Illusion Reverend transmitted. Qin Hao went forward and patted Wuk's shoulder, indicating that he should not be angry. He took the lead and entered the palace gate. Xiao Han, Tang, and the others followed. If you are not convinced, you can come and find me anytime. When Shou Wuk passed by the 6 people, he saw them glaring at him fiercely. He could not help but coldly say this. Too arrogant. I have never been treated like this before. Where did this group of people come from? They shouldn't be deities from the Sword Dao Great World, right? The 6 guards felt Shou Wuk's provocation. They were both angry and afraid. They thought of a certain Sword Dao Great World. From Shou Wuk's performance, only that place could produce such a tyrannical sword cultivator. Furthermore, Shou Wuk's status was not low. The few guards exchanged glances. Soon, they left the palace gate and went to a huge mansion in the city. The deities from the Sword Dao Great World came to the Mirage continent and took the initiative to meet Illusion Reverend. This was not a good sign for the paragon god Dong Bo to take over the heavenly Dao. They had to report this to the higher-ups as soon as possible. After the 6 guards left, the surrounding crowd began to discuss. Some were happy while others were sad. However, in the end they dissipated like smoke. The god of the East wanted to change the Mirage Heavenly Dao Great World's controller. Now, the Sword Dao Great World had interfered. The moment mortals were involved in the contest between the Heavenly Wheel experts, their souls would be directly wiped out by the Heavenly Dao. Chapter 1964. Entering the Illusion Lord Palace, the huge palace was cold and cheerless. It was no longer the grand scene of thousands of disciples cultivating in the past. Occasionally, one could only see a few desolate shadows wandering around the palace, cleaning up the place. Their cultivation bases were also very low. Qin Hao didn't know what had happened in the Illusion Sovereign Palace, but all the signs indicated that the Illusion Sovereign had encountered trouble. The Supreme God is in the Illusion Sovereign Palace. Everyone follow me. A figure walked over. Qin Hao followed the voice and saw a young man in clean clothes with an extraordinary temperament. He was probably the disciple of the Illusion Sovereign and had come to greet them. Qin Hao smiled and nodded. The group followed the young man into the depths of the palace and came to a majestic palace filled with divine light. The young man slowly opened the door and said, "Everyone, please enter." "Thank you," Qin Hao said gently. The group stepped into the palace. The young man looked at their backs, and a faint smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. He didn't follow them, but slowly closed the door. Junior Li Chuji, I was taken care of by Senior Illusion Sovereign in the past. Today, I passed by the temple and came to visit Senior. Qin Hao stepped into the palace. The previously noisy Illusion Sovereign Palace was now cold and cheerless. The space was filled with an invisible chill. It seemed even more desolate than the outside. "Li Chuji," an old voice murmured. In front, a tall figure sat on a cushion and slowly turned around. It was an old man wearing an ancient divine robe. Although he looked very old, the old man's clothes still gave people a feeling of heavenly might. "This old man doesn't seem to know you." The Illusion Sovereign's eyes fell on Qin Hao. He tried hard to recall something, but he couldn't find any impression of Qin Hao. Not only this young man, even the people behind him felt very unfamiliar. He was sure that he had never met them before. "Senior," You really don't know me? Qin Hao smiled and raised his head. A strand of mind power drifted out and converged with the illusion sovereign's mind. At this time, the illusion sovereign's expression suddenly changed. The Qin Hao in his line of sight seemed to have changed. Another face seemed to have emerged from the unfamiliar silhouette, and the two faces gradually overlapped. It was as if fragments of the past were being pulled out from the river of memories of the illusion sovereign. You are. The illusion sovereign pointed forward, his voice trembling. Now that he recognized Qin Hao, great waves surged in his heart. That's right, it's me. Back then, Senior exhausted his divine power to stabilize my soul. I'll never forget this favor. Qin Hao took a few steps forward, his heart surging with excitement. Huan Zun raised his hand and released a layer of divine light. Dense law particles covered the walls of the hall, completely isolating it from the outside world. Then, he nervously stood up from the cushion and rushed in front of Qin Hao. His calloused hands grabbed Qin Hao's hands and said, "You are Qin Hao. You are actually still alive." It's a long story. It's not just me. Awu is still alive, but he's unable to come and greet Senior. Qin Hao said. That origin realm is still there. Qin Hao said. Who? The illusion sovereign let out a heavy breath, and the hall became quiet for the time being. As the controller of the Mirage Plane's heavenly Tao, the illusion sovereign naturally knew about the god of the East's invasion of the Yuanling continent 10,000 years ago. Many planes had participated in that battle. Although the god masters of each plane did not personally come, they had sent their powerful heavenly wheel plane experts to form a vast and mighty alliance to seize the Yuanling plane and occupy it. That was the origin realm. Because it involved too many things, the god of the East did not dare to make a move, so as to avoid attracting the attention of the god kings of the upper world. The god of the East believed that the alliance of the three planes was enough to wipe out the Yuanling gods and seize the power of the origin realm. But who would have thought that the million-strong alliance army would never return? Even the heavenly Tao aura of the Yuanling plane would disappear along with it. Even the god of the East could not sense its whereabout. At that moment, Donghuang believed that the Yuanling heavenly Tao god had destroyed the origin realm. This had happened once before in the wilderness. At that time, the origin realm had also disappeared, which was truly heartbreaking and regrettable. Of course, Donghuang was even more heartbroken because of the heavenly wheel plane experts under him. One of them was even his son, whom he had placed high hopes on. His son had disappeared along with the Yuanling heavenly Tao. The consequences of the battle of the Yuanling gods were far from simple. Not only did it cause the strength of Donghuang's realm to decline, even the other two realm masters who formed the alliance army were greatly dissatisfied with Donghuang. If not for the fear of the news spreading and the god kings of the upper world finding out, the two realm masters would have shed all pretenses of cordiality with Donghuang, triggering a realm war. In the end, the three realm masters were afraid of angering the god kings, so they left the matter unsettled. The battle of the Yuanling gods was a scar in the heart of the god of the East. It was also a major event in the hearts of the heavenly Tao holders of the Donghuang's realm. Even after 10,000 years, the illusion elder still remembered it. At this moment, he witnessed Qin Hao's return alive with his own eyes. How could his mood not be stormy? If the god of the East were to find out, Qin Hao, you must not expose your identity. You must not tell anyone. The illusion elder was so nervous that he could not breathe. If Qin Hao's identity was exposed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Senior, don't worry. I know what to do. Qin Hao was moved. He moved his body slightly and introduced the people behind him one by one. This is my wife. These two are my friends. They all came from the Yuanling Plain. Now, that place is called the Divine Wilderness Continent. Divine Wilderness Continent. The illusion elder murmured and sadly shook his head. From this name, one could imagine the tragedy of the Battle of the Gods 10,000 years ago. Qin Hao was telling him that the battle had caused the Yuanling to no longer have any gods and completely cut off the divine Tao. Child, why did you come out? Moreover, your soul seems to be. The illusion elder stared at Qin Hao's face and felt that Qin Hao's soul was very powerful. When he tried to pry, he faintly felt a sense of danger. That power did not seem to be any weaker than his Tianluan power. Could it be? I have already created a Tianluan and controlled the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness. I have become the god of the divine wilderness plain. Qin Hao gave the illusion elder an answer with his eyes. Who? The illusion elder took 2 deep breaths in his heart. Truly, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Who would have dared to imagine that the army of the 3 realms, dozens of Tianluan experts, not only did they not succeed in conquering the origin realm, but they also led to the death of a person with an incomplete soul to create a Tianluan and become the ruler of the heavenly Tao. Moreover, that was the ruler of the origin realm. Then your Tianluan is at the perfect level. Qin Hao did not hide this. Good. The illusion elder laughed with a kind face. The god of the East had painstakingly seized the power of the origin realm, but in the end it was all for Qin Hao. Could this be considered retribution? If that is the case, why did you come out and come to the Dongwang realm? The illusion elder asked. Back then, you helped me stabilize my soul. I believe that Senior must have seen through something. Awu and I have drifted out of the great world, so we naturally have to return. Now I have left the divine wilderness to explore and familiarize myself with the environment of the myriad world. I passed by the illusion elder and also. Qin Hao rubbed his nose. I want to comprehend the space divine power of the Dongwang realm. Since he had come, he would definitely comprehend the heavenly Tao of the eastern sky realm. If Qin Hao could condense the space divine power, it would naturally be for the best. If Dongwang knew that he had obtained the divine power of his old enemy, his expression would definitely be very interesting. You are really bold. Unfortunately, I can't help you. Now, the Dongwang Pavilion is controlled by Supreme God Dong Bo's people and... The illusion elder spoke until here and promptly omitted the rest of his words. He did not want Qin Hao to worry about the matters here. That would bring trouble to Qin Hao. Chapter 1965. The Mirage Plain was under the control of the God of the East. If Qin Hao wanted to comprehend the power of the world, he had to go to Donghuang's pavilion. In fact, when experts from other planes came here, they would first enter Donghuang's pavilion to comprehend the space world Tao will. Only in this way could they reduce the suppression of the world's will. In the past, the illusion sovereign controlled the mirage heavenly Tao and was the representative of the God of the East. Therefore, it was easy for Qin Hao to enter Donghuang's pavilion. Now it was different from the past. His position as the heavenly Tao's representative could not be maintained for long. Supreme God Dongbo was the direct disciple of the God of the East. He had attained the divine Tao and forged the heavenly wheel 100 years ago. Now, he was living in Donghuang's pavilion and had restricted the movements of the illusion sovereign. Once the God Lord gave the order, he would replace the illusion sovereign's position at any time. The person who was guarding the gate was Supreme God Dongbo's divine guard. In that case, let's go to Donghuang's pavilion first. We will come back later to chat with Senior. Qin Hao could see that the illusion sovereign was in a difficult position. He had a faint guess in his heart, but he did not say it out loud. He cupped his hands and left with Xiao Han and the others. They went all the way to Donghuang's pavilion. I'm afraid that Senior Illusion Sovereign's position will not be maintained. After leaving the hall, Xiao Han approached Qin Hao and whispered. She had also seen the abnormality. It's just a small mirage heavenly Tao. Why not abandon it? Qin Hao did not care about this. The mirage plane was not worthy of his senior's protection. The illusion sovereign should have a broader stage of the divine Tao. Wuck's eyes flashed with a strange light. He secretly glanced at Qin Hao. Did he have some thoughts about the old man? Along the way to Donghuang's pavilion, Qin Hao had a thought when he left the divine wilderness. It was not enough for the four regions to produce many gods. If he wanted to quickly increase the strength of the divine wilderness, he needed to bring in heavenly wheel experts from other planes. The illusion sovereign was the first person he thought of. However, nothing could be forced. If he directly asked the illusion elder to leave with him, it would be too rash. Moreover, the illusion elder might not be willing. Now, Donghuang was preparing to let his direct disciples replace the illusion lord and control the heavenly Tao. This gave Qin Hao an opportunity. Since Donghuang had given him a heavenly wheel expert for free, how could he not accept it? Moreover, with the illusion elder's current situation, he most likely had no choice but to leave. It's the best of both worlds. Qin Hao's mouth glowed with delight. In front of him, a gigantic building that reached the sky came into view. Donghuang Pavilion. The Donghuang Pavilion was located at a very high location and was surrounded by the radiance of the divine path. Other than the illusion deity palace, this was the holy land of cultivation that all the cultivators in the continent dreamed of. The Donghuang Pavilion was built by people sent by the god of the East. Inside, there were countless emperor's techniques, all of which were copied from the Donghuang Palace of the main world. They were powerful and precious, far more powerful than the techniques of ordinary emperor's path forces outside. After stepping into the emperor's path, if a cultivator wanted to further increase their strength, the Donghuang Pavilion and the illusion deity palace were necessary choices. In comparison, the Donghuang Pavilion contained emperor's techniques, which was somewhat similar to the divine pavilion built by Qin Hao. The illusion deity palace had the illusion deity personally teaching it, so the latter's conditions were naturally superior. In the past, the illusion deity palace was bustling with people, and there was an endless stream of people seeking Tao. Now, the situation was the opposite. The illusion deity palace had declined, and the Donghuang Pavilion was becoming more and more popular. According to rumors, Supreme God Dongbo would soon descend to the Donghuang Pavilion from the main world to control the illusion heavenly Tao. Under such circumstances, it was obviously wiser to enter the Donghuang Pavilion to cultivate. After all, Supreme God Dongbo was about to replace the illusion deity. A majestic sky staircase led to the magnificent Donghuang Pavilion, and there were many guards armed with swords standing on both sides. Seeing that Qin Hao and his group were about to walk up, they immediately stopped them. "I'm here to comprehend the Divine Master's divine decree in the Donghuang Pavilion." Qin Hao furrowed his brows. "Report your name, origin, and cultivation," a guard asked sternly. "Li Chuji, itinerant cultivator, Nirvana realm, level 3 laws." Qin Hao concealed his true cultivation level. The guard nodded. Apart from obtaining Supreme God Dongbo's approval, there was another way to enter the Donghuang Pavilion, and that was to take a test. Presumably, this group of people was here for the test. As long as they passed, they could enter the Donghuang Pavilion to obtain emperor techniques to cultivate. However, the test was very difficult and ordinary people basically had no hope. Only the monstrous geniuses of the continent's Emperor Tao aristocratic families had a chance. Moreover, the test was divided into different levels. The higher the difficulty, the more resources one could obtain, and the easier it was to be valued by the Donghuang Pavilion. "Oh, I was wondering who it was. So it's the illusion deity. Since the illusion deity is here to explain the divine Tao to you, why do you still want to come to the Donghuang Pavilion for the test? Could it be that you think the illusion deity's ability is not up to par, and you don't like it?" Just as the guard was about to let them pass, a mocking voice came from above the sky staircase. Qin Hao looked up and saw that it was Divine General Dong Bo who had stopped them from entering the Illusion Deity Palace. The Illusion Deity's divine Tao is naturally profound, but the Dongwang Pavilion has the God of the East's divine will. Everyone has their own strength. We admire the Divine Lord's might and comprehend the Divine Lord's divine will. Is it not appropriate? Qin Hao replied. Of course it's appropriate. However, our Dongwang Pavilion is not a place where just anyone can step in. There are many cultivators here every day, and we don't have the time to entertain you. Moreover, most of the people who come to take the test are unable to pass, wasting their time. In response to this, Supreme God Dong Bo has set up a selection rule, and we divine generals will decide. I don't think you're qualified, the tall and burly unblemished divine general said. Not qualified? These words made Qin Hao's face darken. In front of the Illusion Deity Palace, Wuk had fought 6 unblemished divine generals with one sword, and they could not even withstand a single blow. Was this not qualified? If he and Wuk were not qualified, then what was Divine General Dong Bo, who was standing on the sky staircase? Obviously, the other party was deliberately making things difficult. At this moment, that Divine General Dong Bo looked at Qin Hao with a smile, looking down at him condescendingly. If one wanted to enter the Dongwang Pavilion, they would have to give their approval first. Qin Hao did not say anything. He had nothing to say to a servant. At this moment, his divine will swept out and went up the sky staircase, passing by the 6 divine generals' Dongwang Pavilion, and in an instant, spied on the situation above in detail. At this moment, in the square of the Dongwang Pavilion, a group of men and women were drinking tea and discussing Tao. All of them had an extraordinary temperament. Among them, a young man was sitting there. Qin Hao had seen him not long ago. It was the young man who led them into the Illusion Deity Palace. This young man sensed the arrival of a telekinetic power, as if he had expected Qin Hao's group to come here. He immediately looked in the direction of the sky staircase with a smile, as if he was looking at Qin Hao from a distance. "Who is it? How dare you?" Several voices shouted from the banquet. There was actually someone who dared to use telekinetic power to spy on the Dongwang Pavilion, daring to rudely spy on them. In an instant, these people's eyes became incomparably sharp. Among them, a woman in a luxurious palace dress directly burst out her telekinetic power, pressing down on the sky staircase from above. The others also surged with Emperor's light, and waves of telekinetic power gathered on Qin Hao's body. However, they were directly ignored by Qin Hao. "Who's in charge here?" Qin Hao shouted up in the air. At this time, the people in the square stood up one after another. The young man also slowly stood up and smiled at the crowd, saying, "Let's go and take a look." Everyone nodded and followed behind the young man. Soon, they arrived at the sky staircase, and their eyes focused on Qin Hao's position. This is the son of the Dong Bo Supreme God, the divine son of Higashiwa. The tall and burly divine general pointed at the young man and said respectfully. Qin Hao's heart trembled. The son of the Dong Bo Supreme God, this person was not a disciple of Senior Illusion Reverend. It seemed that the matter was more serious than he had imagined, and Senior Illusion Reverend was obviously grounded. Moreover, the son of the Dong Bo Supreme God was personally monitoring him. Where did this barbarian come from? How rude! Beside the divine son of Higashiwa, a woman in a luxurious palace dress scolded Qin Hao and the others. Her eyes were extremely unfriendly. She was drinking tea and discussing with the divine son of Higashiwa, and they were talking about life's ideals. Suddenly, her mood was disturbed, and she naturally saw Qin Hao as an eyesore. "Everyone, we meet again. I guessed that you would come here, but I didn't expect it to be so soon," the divine son of Higashiwa said. "I chatted with Senior Illusion Reverend for a while. Because I'm not used to the power of the great space world, I came to the Dongwang Pavilion to comprehend the divine will of the Divine Master." Qin Hao said. Higashiwa nodded. This was normal. Any cultivator from any plane that came to the Dongwang realm would reject the power of space. Only by comprehending the divine will of the God of the East and integrating it with the heavenly way would they be able to alleviate the pressure of the heavenly way. Your servants are not allowed to enter. Tang pointed at the tall and burly divine general. These are my father's guards. They are here to carry out orders. What they do is what they should do. It's their duty. Higashiwa said. The tall and burly divine general immediately raised his nose in pride. I don't know how to qualify for the examination of the Donghuang Pavilion. If this person can deny us with just one sentence, then can I assume that one day, when the divine son of Higashiwa comes to our sword world, I can also stop you from comprehending the sword master's will and let you be suppressed by the sword power of the sword world? Qin Hao said righteously. How dare you? The tall and burly divine general said angrily. Why wouldn't I dare? We came from afar to comprehend the divine will of the God of the East and relieve the pressure of the space world. If you don't allow it, then as long as you dare to enter the sword world, I won't allow you to take half a step into the sword god pavilion. Showuk shouted loudly with an aggressive aura. It was as if he was using his power to suppress them. The group of people behind the divine son of Higashiwa had ugly expressions. If this was true, then the people of the space world would inevitably suffer. Ha ha, you are indeed people of the Great Path Sword World. You are so straightforward. Consider it my loss. Higashiwa laughed loudly. We have no intention of offending the Donghuang realm. We just want to enter the Donghuang Pavilion. Is that okay? Qin Hao said. Since the other party believed that they were from the sword world, they might as well use the identity of sword cultivators from the sword world. Okay. Higashiwa nodded. However, let me give you a piece of advice. The sword world shouldn't interfere with the illusion reverend's matter. He wasn't sure what status Qin Hao and Showuk had in the sword world. From their performance, to be able to reach Nirvana realm, they were at least from the Sword Monarch clan. If their clan was related to the master of the sword world, it would be troublesome. Therefore, Higashiwa didn't dare to be too forceful and tactfully advised. Divine Son's words are laughable. I once met Senior Illusion Reverend by chance. The matters of the Donghuang realm should be arranged by the God of the East. Why should I interfere? Qin Hao said casually. Are you going to let us in or not? Kuang Tang couldn't wait any longer. Due to his innate spiritual consciousness being damaged, he suffered a greater spatial suppression than Xiao Han and Showuk. It was very uncomfortable to be under the illusion heavenly Tao. Naturally, you can enter. However, you mocked my father's divine generals as trash in front of the illusion reverend's palace. Shouldn't you apologize to them? Higashiwa's tone changed and his eyes turned cold. Chapter 1966. Apologize? Divine General Dong Bo was ordered to guard the Illusion Sovereign Palace and not allow any outsiders to enter. It was his duty, and Qin Hao did not force his way in. Instead, he asked to see the Illusion Sovereign and let Divine General Dong Bo's subordinate pass on the message. Not only did these people not pass on the message, they even chased Qin Hao away and threatened to throw him out. Qin Hao was the supreme god of the divine wilderness plain, and Wuk came from a famous sword sect. How could they be looked down upon? Even if Wuk had the advantage in realm, the other party was 6 unblemished experts. They also had the support of the great space world. If they still lost, they could only blame themselves for not being as strong as others. Where did they get the face and courage to ask for an apology? Wuk would not apologize. He thought that the 6 divine General Dong Bai were trash. Coming from the great sword world, you should have the grace to admit your mistakes, right? Higashiwa chuckled as he spoke, acting as if he was upholding justice. Qin Hao saw this and chuckled in his heart. He cupped his hands and said, "My words were too harsh before. It was my fault. I hope the divine generals do not blame me." "Is this an apology?" A divine general pointed at Qin Hao and sneered. "Louder, I didn't hear you." The tall and strong divine general put his hands on his waist and straightened his body. "No need to apologize to them." Wuk looked slightly angry as he spoke to Qin Hao. Qin Hao shook his head and raised his voice. He shouted, "When I first came to Dongwang Plain, I offended the divine generals. Please forgive me." "Louder, are you not full?" That person continued to roar, extremely dissatisfied. Qin Hao's expression suddenly turned cold. His pupils contracted as he stared above and spat out 2 words, "Trash." "You." That person was so angry that his face turned red and the veins on his neck bulged. "Too arrogant. Coming to our Dongwang Plain to behave atrociously." A group of aristocratic family disciples behind Higashua looked down angrily. The sword cultivators of the great sword world were too arrogant. "Hee, aren't you purposely making things difficult for me by doing this?" Higashua said coldly. He gave Qin Hao a way out, but the other party continued to climb his way up. "There is no need to apologize in our sword world. The bigger fist is the reason. 6 people can't win against 1. If the supreme god Dongbai is not raising a bunch of trash, then what is?" Qin Hao shouted. "Divine Son, please let me kill this person." The tall and burly divine general pleaded angrily. Higashua ignored him. He looked at Qin Hao and sighed. "Since that is the case, then fine. Since you are a guest, do things according to the rules of your sword world. I have a subordinate here. If you can defeat him, you can enter the Dongwang Pavilion to comprehend the Divine Lord's divine intent. If you can't, leave that woman behind. The rest of you can crawl out of the Dongwang Plain." Heavy footsteps came out from the Dongwang Pavilion. Dong, dong. The ground shook. Following that, a tall and sturdy figure wearing heavy armor stood beside Higashua. A boxy and rough face stared below. The light of the 9 realms of the martial path revolved around his tyrannical body, with mottled law particles surging. When this person appeared, the 6 divine generals who were defeated earlier had a change in expression. They lowered their heads and did not have the courage to look at this tall and sturdy general. It was as if they had an inferiority complex. "Yukong, Nirvana Realm, Level 3 Laws," Higashua introduced. Yukong was the divine general by his father's side. His father had several experts like him under his command. As the god of the East had yet to give the order, his father and many of his men could not all be sent to the Mirage Plain. Only Yukong was sent to guard the Dongwang Pavilion. He was also the strongest Tao protector by Higashua's side. As for the 6 unblemished divine generals, they were at most divine guards. At this moment, Yukong's face was especially cold. Qin Hao's words of trash not only insulted others, but also trampled on his dignity. At this moment, the 9 realms of the martial path that revolved around his body suddenly erupted. A Nirvana Emperor's aura surged from the stairway to heaven. He stretched his palm downwards and blasted towards Qin Hao's position. The 9 realms of the martial path swirled like a gale, setting off layers of terrifying Tao radiance. The spatial energy contained in Mirage City also crazily crushed towards Qin Hao. Showuk took a step forward. The 9 realms of the martial path revolved around his body. He directly ignored the palm that descended from the sky. He stepped onto the first step of the stairway to heaven and began to ascend. A loud rumbling sound rolled and roared. Cracks appeared on every step of the stairway to heaven. The stone steps used to construct the Dongwang Pavilion were naturally extraordinary. They were incomparably sturdy and reinforced by spatial energy. But at this moment, countless cracks appeared under the pressure of the palm. It was clear how powerful Yukong was. "Something big has happened. The battle has begun." Many cultivators in the city were alarmed. They looked at the Dongwang pavilion. Figures flew over from different positions and hovered in the air to watch the battle. Someone actually dared to barge into the Dongwang pavilion. They were extremely bold. At this moment, in the Illusion Lord's palace, the Illusion Lord also felt the will of the Great Path erupting from the Dongwang pavilion. Borrowing the power of the heavenly path, the scene was clearly transmitted to his divine consciousness. His expression was calm, and he did not step forward to stop it. If he were to intervene, it would be easier to implicate Qin Hao, and the relationship between the two sides would be unclear. Swoosh! A ray of sword light suddenly shot out from Wuck's body. The golden sword light was wrapped in the light of the 9 realms. It was suffused with the light of particles. It went against the sky and pierced through the void. Suddenly, the power that suppressed this part of the world disappeared. The raging wind suddenly stopped. Apologize? Was this strength worthy of an apology? Yukong's plane was similar to Wuck's, and his precepts were also one level higher. Even so, he could not stop his advance. He walked up step by step. Today, he wanted to see who could stop him from entering the Dongwang pavilion. Not bad, Yukong praised. That wisp of sword will was extremely sharp and pure, as expected of a cultivator from the great world of swordsmanship. Bang! Yukong's foot stomped down. The sky staircase shook as if it was about to shatter. Countless cultivators who were watching the battle from afar felt their hearts tighten. He clenched his hand into a fist, and the endless power of space condensed into a fist light. He punched out, and a loud sound erupted from the space. It was extremely terrifying. It was as if wherever the will of the Great Path passed, everything would explode under his fist. Wuck looked up and felt the power contained in this fist. Finally, there was something to it. He did not stop and continued to move forward against the might of Yukong's fist. When a series of sonic booms were about to explode in front of him, he pointed his finger forward. It was as dazzling as the sword light. With a whoosh, it seemed to have penetrated something. Suddenly, the intense light of particles was annihilated under his sword finger. He continued to move forward. So powerful! Who are they? Countless cultivators outside the arena were shocked. This sword had stunned the cultivators of Mirage City. It was a feast for their eyes. Even the group of aristocratic family members behind Higashiwa nodded. Such a powerful and pure sword will. Not to mention Mirage City, there were probably not many sword cultivators in the entire Dongwang Great World that could compare to this person. This scene made Higashiwa's eyes light up. It felt as if he had found a treasure. Do you need us to apologize with this little strength? Qin Hao laughed as he shouted upwards. He discovered that the flawless sword intent was even purer than before. As his cultivation level increased, it was as though no energy from the myriad of things in the world could be mixed into his flawless sword intent. His sword wasn't affected by the myriad of laws. The laws and regulations he had condensed were the same as each other, bringing with it an incomparably powerful piercing force. At this moment, Qin Hao was a little bit looking forward to Wuck becoming a god. He wondered what kind of impact it would have on sword cultivators in the world when he gained control of the divine wilderness sword Dao. Humph! Qin Hao's words made Higashiwa's face turn a little ugly. Wuck snorted coldly. The aura he emitted was even more terrifying than before. He stretched out his arms and the Emperor's will resonated with the heavenly Dao. Following the whooshing sound, waves of invisible fist energy shuttled through space and bombarded from all directions. They madly gathered towards Wuck's position. Yukong did not swing his fist. However, his will of Dao dominated this space. With a thought, thousands of fist wills appeared. Wuck's footsteps finally stopped. The space around him was pressuring him. The blood in his body flowed faster and his internal organs were in turmoil. He could not help but reveal a serious expression after being hit by the fist energy. What Yukong used should be a powerful spatial fist technique. Whoosh! A great Dao sword lotus bloomed and closed under Wuk's feet. The petals wrapped around his body like a golden cocoon. At this moment, countless fist forces bombarded down through space, shaking the sword cocoon, causing balls of dense sparks to appear. Flawless stood towering on the stairway to heaven, facing the stormy waves of attacks without moving an inch. Yukong's brows tightened. He found that the sword veil was incomparably sturdy. Even if he mobilized the space to suppress it, he could not crush it. Usually, his fist energy could ignore space and even bypass his opponent's will of Tao by borrowing the power of the world. This was because there were gaps between will of Tao. However, he found that he could not pass through Wuk's sword will. What level of sword will was his opponent's? I have seen the art of space. Now I will return the favor. At this time, Wuk's voice came from within the dazzling sword cocoon. The sword veil exploded and shattered. Thousands of golden swords flew in all directions and collided with the fist energy dancing in the air. The scene was spectacular. In this magnificent scene, there was a figure flying up like a sword. The instant Wu Kei moved, it was so fast that even Yukong, who could control space, couldn't react in time. Facing the incoming sword shadow, Yukong panicked and retreated a few steps. Swoosh! A strand of sword will pierced into his mind. Just as Yukong stabilized his body, his sovereign soul was flooded by Wuk's sword will. In an instant, his mind seemed to explode and his face turned pale. When he came back to his senses, he found that Wuk was already standing on the sky stairwell and beside him. This sword is called Heart Questioning, Wuk said calmly. Heart Questioning sword, soul slaying, heart slaying. However, he did not take the opportunity to pierce Yukong's divine soul. He only messed up his thoughts. The scene quieted down. Yukong was stunned on the spot with a pale face. Countless people from the prestigious families in Mirage City looked at him, not knowing what had happened. But it was obvious that Yukong had lost this battle. This was a huge blow to the local aristocratic families. The face of the woman standing beside Higashiwa was distorted. Yukong was the personal divine general of the Dongbo divinity and served the heavenly wheel realm cultivators all year round. He had received the teachings of the Tao, so how could he lose to someone from the sword realm? Especially when Yukong had the support of the spatial realm, yet he still lost. Clap, clap, clap. A rhythmic applause sounded, breaking the silent atmosphere. Higashiwa applauded and praised, brilliant. As expected of a genius from the sword realm. We admit defeat. However, there are countless experts in Donghuang's realm. There are many who can defeat Yukong. Since things had come to this, continuing to argue would only make them look worse. It was better to be magnanimous and at least win some face. Everyone, please. At the bottom of the sky stairwell, a guard received Higashiwa's signal and extended his hand to Qin Hao, Xiao Han, and the others. Donghuang's pavilion allowed them to comprehend the Divine Lord's will. Chapter 1967. Yukong was defeated by Wuk. Higashiwa's evaluation was that there were countless experts in the Donghuang realm, and there were many who defeated Yukong. He admitted defeat, but he didn't lower the standards of the Donghuang realm. This made Wuk seem mediocre instead. After all, there were many people like Wuk in the realm. I'm ashamed to say that our strength is at the bottom of the sword realm. Furthermore, my brother didn't use his full strength and made a fool of himself in front of God Higashiwa. Qin Hao took a step forward and pretended to be humble. Everyone couldn't help but want to beat him up. When they heard his words, their faces turned even uglier. Wuk defeated Yukong, and his strength was at the bottom? How many Yukongs were there in the Donghuang realm? Putting aside the few heavenly wheel experts, Yukong's combat strength was definitely at the top. Higashiwa didn't blush when he boasted, but he didn't expect Qin Hao to be even more arrogant. As they walked up, when Qin Hao passed by Yukong, this divine general under Supreme God Dong Bai was so angry that his body trembled. He had the urge to tear Qin Hao in half. At this moment, Qin Hao and the rest stepped into the training hall. In front of them, a huge and majestic shrine stood tall. In front of the door there was a statue. It was the statue of the god of the East. This statue looked to be around 40 to 50 years old. Its outline was clear, and its eyes were bright and full of spirit. It stood at a height of a few hundred feet, like a guardian god. It emitted a huge pressure that made people sigh in awe. Qin Hao looked at the statue and their eyes met. It felt like he was looking at the god of the East from a distance. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that the statue was alive, and the stronger the pressure it emitted was. However, Qin Hao's state of mind was very calm, without any ripples. To enter the Donghuang Pavilion, you have to undergo a test. As for what level you can achieve, it depends on you. Higashiwa brought many disciples from the aristocratic families to watch from the side. He pointed at the statue and said, "Then what is considered as meeting the standard?" Qin Hao glanced at Higashiwa. Communicating with the statue of the Divine Master and resonating with the Divine Will is the lowest requirement. If you have the ability to summon the Divine Master's will, congratulations, you might even be able to take control of the Donghuang Pavilion. The tall immortal general snorted coldly. Unfortunately, in the entire Donghuang's realm, no one has been able to summon the will of a Divine Master. Higashiwa said. He was not lying. Not to mention a Nirvana realm expert, even a Heavenly Wheel realm expert would find it extremely difficult to alarm the God of the East by relying on the resonance of Divine Will. Basically, it was impossible for anyone to do it. Qin Hao nodded. If this was true, it proved that the person who came to take the test had a Tao will that could connect with the entire realm and had the super potential to take control of the Donghuang's realm. It would not be a problem to replace Donghuang, let alone take control of the Donghuang Pavilion. It was already a blessing that they were not killed by Donghuang. Unless Donghuang was magnanimous enough to tolerate the appearance of someone who could replace him. Let's try. The talent of the sword cultivators from the Sword Tao world should not disappoint us. Higashiwa looked like he was waiting to watch a good show. It was difficult for people from the space realm to pass the test, let alone a group of sword cultivators from the sword world. It was already rare for Qin Hao to be able to comprehend some space Tao from the Divine Master's will and relieve the suppression of the realm might. Let me try. Tang wanted to step forward, but Qin Hao shook his head at him. Tang's consciousness was damaged and had a congenital defect. He was not good at comprehension. Next, Qin Hao walked forward. His body floated into the air bit by bit until he was at the same height as the statue. At this moment, his divine consciousness swept towards the statue and slowly seeped into it. His eyes flashed with flame patterns, and his silver hair fluttered. He exuded a somewhat demonic feeling. Through the observation of the 10,000 spirit fire eyes, everything in the world became clearer in Qin Hao's eyes. Under his gaze, countless meridians gradually meandered along the Donghuang's statue. It was as if the meridians were opened and blood was injected into the statue. The statue became more and more like a living creature. He could feel the surging will and divine power from it. Buzz. The void trembled. Everyone saw that the eyes of the Donghuang's statue burst with divine light. At the same time, Qin Hao's silver hair fluttered. Those flame-like eyes gradually transformed into a noble golden light. Between the two, a formless mighty force seemed to descend, causing a resonance. The eyes of the Divine Lord's statue lit up. The disciples of the aristocratic families in Mirage City were all shocked. The swordsman from the sword world could actually resonate with the Divine Lord's will so quickly. This was undoubtedly a slap in the face. The people of the sword world are indeed extraordinary. However, to resonate with the Divine Lord's statue, many of the extraordinary geniuses of the imperial families in the Donghuang's realm can also do it. Higashiwa spoke. He did not believe Qin Hao's nonsense about being at the bottom. This group of people must be the top geniuses of the sword world. Otherwise, how could they so easily comprehend the way of space and resonate with the Divine Lord's statue? Even so, there were many top geniuses in the Donghuang's realm who could do it. However, just as Higashiwa's voice fell, the statue became brighter and brighter. The body of several tens of feet was dazzling with divine light. A divine radiance of the great Tao soared into the sky and soared into the firmament. In an instant, the heavenly path of mirage rumbled. A formless aura descended and poured into Qin Hao's body as though it had fused with his divine soul. Countless people were dumbfounded. Resonating with the heavenly path of a plane and controlling the might of the heavenly path was not something that could be easily done by the geniuses of the aristocratic families in the Donghuang's realm. Qin Hao's performance was sufficient to prove that he had the potential to become a heavenly wheel expert. In the future, he might very well become the ruler of a plane. If such a person was born in any other imperial family, he would definitely be worshipped like an ancestor. He would get whatever he wanted. To put it bluntly, even as the son of the Dongbo Divine Lord, Higashiwa might not be able to resonate with the heavenly path of mirage. If the father attained the divine throne, the son might not become a god. At most, he would be able to borrow the power of the heavenly path. However, Li Chuji, a mere member of the sword world, had achieved what countless cultivators in the spatial world dreamed of. He had a chance to forge a heavenly wheel. Buzz. At this moment, a multicolored radiance radiated out. It was so dazzling that people could not open their eyes. In Mirage City, countless people cried out in alarm. They felt the heavenly will descend upon the city and suppress this part of the world. Everyone standing in the Donghuang's pavilion felt as though their blood had frozen and their hearts had stopped beating. How could this be? Things were progressing too quickly. If Qin Hao was merely summoning the heavenly will and trying to control it, then at this moment, he had turned the power of control into reality. His will was leading the heavenly path to suppress Mirage City. Even the illusion sovereign in the illusion sovereign palace was dumbfounded. Could this be the terrifying part of the heavenly wheel of the original realm? The illusion sovereign sensed the commotion in the Donghuang's pavilion. The original realm gathered everything into one and gathered all the laws of the universe to achieve perfection. Outside of the original realm, other heavenly paths were born with imperfections. The will released by Qin Hao could make up for the imperfections of the mirage. Therefore, his will was recognized by the plane's will and was willing to let him control it. This was the strength of the original realm. No matter which plane it was in, not only would it not be restricted or suppressed, it could even merge with the plane and replace the imperfections. The illusion sovereign did not doubt that as long as Qin Hao was willing, he could absorb the heavenly path of mirage into his will and make the plane reject the illusion sovereign. It was simply heaven-defying. Your so-called difficulty is just SOSO. I can do it effortlessly. Why is it that when it comes to Son of God Higashiwa, it is harder than ascending to heaven? In the Donghuang's pavilion, Qin Hao was floating in the air. With the heavenly might on his body, he released a suffocating pressure. With a single thought, he could even crush the countless living beings in the mirage, including the descendants of the various aristocratic families. Donghuang's pavilion has not shown any abnormalities. The Divine Master has ordered that whoever activates the divine energy of a major world in the Donghuang's pavilion can become the plane's ruler. If Your Excellency has the guts, go ahead and fight, Higashiwa said loudly as he panted, trying to regain his face. Is that so? Son of God Higashiwa, you are so stubborn. You don't even consider your father's feelings. If I can really do it, the Dongbo Supreme God's wish to control the Mirage Plane will go down the drain." Qin Hao smiled. As he spoke, he secretly activated the power of the heavenly chakram in his body. The perfect energy of the original realm surged along the heavenly chakram, transforming into a willpower that crazily attacked the statue of Dong Huang. Dong Huang's Bottomanda instantly expanded with tens of thousands of rays of light. A beam of light pierced through the sky as though it was heading to the end of the Dong Huang realm. At that moment, the power of a major world that filled the pavilion of Dong Huang sensed the aura of the original realm on Qin Hao's body. It was the power of the beginning of the universe. In an instant, particles that filled the sky jumped and jumped in joy. They turned into a stream of water and lingered around Qin Hao's body. They were like a group of hungry children who greedily sought the energy of the original realm on Qin Hao's body. Rumble! Dong Huang's pavilion shook. A divine radiance radiated from it, reaching a radius of hundreds of millions of miles and enveloping the entire Mirage City. At that moment, Higashiwa's jaw dropped to the ground. His heart was about to jump out of his chest. The shock on his face could not be any greater. This was simply the power of a major world contained in Dong Huang's pavilion had been absorbed by a swordsman who was taking the examination. What the hell? The 6 flawless experts who had previously intercepted Qin Hao were trembling like a sieve. What stupid thing had they done today? They had blocked the path of a genius who had the potential to forge a heavenly chakram and even prevented him from entering Dong Huang's pavilion. My apologies. I was careless and ruined Supreme Divinity Dong Bo's beautiful dream. Qin Hao looked apologetically at Higashiwa's son. The divine radiance from the divine statue swept through the 9 heavens, attracting the heavenly might of the Mirage Plane and awakening the power of a major world in Dong Huang's pavilion. This was the miracle that Higashiwa had said had never appeared in history. Even a heavenly chakram expert could not do it. Today, Qin Hao had allowed Higashiwa to witness the birth of a miracle with his own eyes. In the city, countless people raised their heads to look at the soaring multicolored light. At that moment, a terrifying aura descended. A huge illusory figure slowly appeared. It was vivid and lifelike, as though it was a real existence. Especially when the illusory figure opened its eyes, all the cultivators in the city knelt down. Their hearts were in turmoil. The Illusion Lord in the Illusion Lord Palace also left the futon and knelt on the floor of the main hall. His head was prostrated on the ground. The divine radiance fell from the sky and bathed the statue of the Lord of Gods on Dong Huang's training ground. The unparalleled illusory figure standing in the sky looked at Qin Hao. At that moment, Qin Hao's gaze seemed to travel through the boundless space and saw a powerful god standing on another plane. It was not difficult to mobilize the power of the original realm to allow him to control the Mirage heavenly path. But now, his actions had alarmed the owner of the statue, the god of the East, who was far away. Dong Huang, below the divine king, was the ruler of a world. With a wave of his hand, he could annihilate a heavenly chakram cultivator. This incomparably shocking scene frightened all the cultivators in the city, including Higashiwa. He never thought that Qin Hao could really alarm the will of the Lord of Gods to descend here. He had slapped his own face so hard that he did not know how to end the situation. He even felt fear in his heart. If the god of the East really ordered the people of the Sword World to take control of the Mirage Plane, then the ending waiting for Higashiwa would be that he would be exiled to another weak plane by the furious divine Lord Dongbo. It was very likely that he would not be able to return for the rest of his life. That ending would be too tragic. Greetings to the god of the East. All the cultivators in the city had a tacit understanding as they shouted respectfully at the same time. Facing the majestic illusory figure in the sky, all the living creatures were humble to the bone. The illusory figure of Dong Huang did not pay attention to these people. Instead, he looked at Qin Hao and asked, You accepted the power of the great realm of Donghuang's pavilion? Yes, God of the East. Qin Hao raised his head and said calmly. Not from the space realm? Donghuang continued. I am Li Chuji, from the Sword World. Qin Hao bowed slightly to show his respect. Although he was not afraid that Donghuang would be jealous of his ability to make a move, he knew how to play his role well. At this time, a sharp light flashed in Donghuang's eyes. As the ruler of a realm, no matter whose territory someone who could replace his position appeared, he would be alarmed and even have the intention to kill. However, Li Chuji was not from the space realm. If he made a move, the divine master of the sword world would not sit by and do nothing. Especially since Li Chuji was so talented, his background was definitely not simple. It was very likely that he was the son of a heavenly wheel expert, or even the descendant of the master of the sword world. Donghuang's pavilion does not set any restrictions on you. You can comprehend the Emperor's techniques at will. You can even control the illusory heavenly path on behalf of the sword world, provided that you give up your identity in the sword world and join the Donghuang realm. God of the East said, Thank you, Divine Master. I am just passing by and have no intention of replacing the illusion god. Because the divine son of Higashiwa and his subordinates did not allow us to enter Donghuang's pavilion to comprehend the divine master's will and relieve the pressure caused by the space realm, we have alarmed the divine master. Qin Hao replied, I see. Donghuang nodded and coldly glanced at Higashiwa. You are no longer the divine son, and I do not wish to see you in Donghuang's realm. Later, your father's men will take you to a divine plane. There are only monsters and beasts there. There are no human women, not even a single man. You will live and die on your own. The multicolored light receded and the illusory heavenly path disappeared. The space realm energy surrounding Qin Hao's body was forcibly extracted by a powerful will and rushed back into Donghuang's pavilion. Mirage City returned to normal as though nothing had happened. However, the hearts of the people could not calm down for a long time, especially Higashiwa. His face was pale from shock and he fell to the ground like a pile of mud. After a long time, he suddenly woke up and shouted at the sky. Unfortunately, the will of the god of the East did not return. How could this be? I didn't do it on purpose. Divine Master, I beg you. Higashiwa mumbled in a daze as though he had lost his soul. Divine Son, please restrain your grief. A tall and burly divine general kindly stepped forward to support him. Higashiwa raised his head and looked at the divine general. His aura suddenly erupted and merged with the space Grand Tao. His 5 fingers burst out with extremely sharp and flawless imperial radiance. He pierced through the tall and burly divine general. That bloody palm was a shocking sight. You! The tall and burly divine general was in disbelief. Trash, it's all your fault. You deserve to die. Higashiwa's eyes were extremely ruthless. He slowly withdrew his palm and the tall and burly divine general fell to the ground. Chapter 1968. In the training hall of Donghuang's pavilion, the disciples of various clans kept their distance from Higashiwa as if he was the plague. Many people cupped their hands in farewell and left in a hurry. The woman in the palace dress did not even turn her head back. Higashiwa smiled bleakly. He did not need to care about the human heart. He looked at Qin Hao and said, Are you satisfied? Isn't this what the divine child wanted? Qin Hao said calmly. Higashiwa had pushed himself into a dead end. He was just cooperating with him and satisfying Higashiwa's needs. Then, Qin Hao led Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang into Donghuang's pavilion. Donghuang had ordered that Donghuang's pavilion would not set any restrictions on him. He naturally could not waste the opportunity to cultivate the space realm. Li Chu-san, I will remember your names. Higashiwa stared at Qin Hao's back with a gloomy expression. His eyes were full of murderous intent. "Divine child, you have suffered these days. Come with me," Yukong said. His attitude was not as respectful as before. Who would dare to disobey the Divine Lord's order of exile? Now, Higashiwa had nothing to do with the Dongwang clan other than the blood of Divine Lord Dong Bo flowing in his veins. Higashiwa left with Yukong and was temporarily guarded. When the higher-ups sent people over, they would take him to a barbarian land. He would only be accompanied by animals. Qin Hao and the others stepped into Donghuang's pavilion and began to read the ancient books of the space realm stored inside. The interior of Donghuang's pavilion was well built. There was a sea of books and a cultivation room for people to comprehend and cultivate at the same time. Gradually, everyone was immersed in it and forgot about the time in the outside world. Qin Hao and the other three stayed together. First, he shared his comprehension of the power of the space world with the others. When his consciousness entered his mind, Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang also clearly felt the wonders of the space will of Wei. From there, they slowly tried to control this power. Xiao Han specialized in spiritual type attack. When she was in the Divine Palace, the Empyrean Tao law she had condensed was a technique that borrowed the Tao of space to divert the attacks of others. Han Er's perception was extremely high, and she had also received Qin Hao's teachings. She had integrated the great Tao of space into her cultivation effortlessly. Through the battle with Yukong, Wuk had also comprehended the strength of the power of space. If it wasn't for the fact that he possessed the perfect heavenly Tao and didn't have any loopholes in his Tao insight, it wouldn't be easy for him to block Yukong's all-pervasive spatial fist technique, and it was extremely likely that he would be injured in this battle. However, this battle also gave Wuk a general understanding of the cultivators in the outside world. Those of the same level or even those whose cultivation was slightly higher than his, relying on the advantage of his perfect heavenly Tao, he was still invincible. Tang's situation was different from that of Xiao Han and Wuk. His innate spiritual consciousness was damaged. Even though Qin Hao had imbued him with insights, it was still difficult for him to understand at the moment. Trapped under the great world's heavenly Tao, Tang still couldn't escape the predicament of being suppressed. At this time, in a secret room, Qin Hao was cultivating. Next to him was a pile of space classics that were as tall as a person, like a small mountain. Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang sat in the four corners of the secret room. They were also cultivating and comprehending their own spatial technique. Qin Hao's body was surrounded by an invisible force. His clothes moved and rustled. If one looked carefully, they would find that there were a large number of flame particles rolling under his clothes. In his flesh and blood, there was a perfect heavenly wheel that connected to his bones. Moreover, there was a fine line of fire that moved at the same time as the heavenly wheel. Countless spatial techniques gathered in his divine consciousness. He had a photographic memory of all the classics that he had read. Qin Hao seemed to have countless scrolls floating in his mind. Those scrolls rose with his divine consciousness and began to fill with ancient characters. At this time, the space in the secret room seemed to be forcefully expanded by a force. It became boundlessly huge and turned into a vast world. Wuk, Xiao Han, and even Tang felt the changes in the space of the secret room. Everyone sat where they were, like insignificant specks of dust in the endless world. Boom. A terrifying aura swept from Qin Hao's body. A whirlwind of will blew and became more and more turbulent. At this time, his will dominated the entire space of the secret room. Everyone heard a strong sword sound at the same time. The sound was close to their ears, but they could not sense its specific location. This change made Showuk break out in a cold sweat. He felt a great sense of danger. The sword will in his body exploded, like a storm that wanted to sweep through the boundless world of the secret room. On his forehead, the sword spirit of Shadowless flashed with a brilliant light. Wuk's spiritual soul also became stronger with the change in the light. The sword will that filled the air became even more monstrous. He tried to find the location of the sword's sound in his ears. Even though his will covered the space that Qin Hao had expanded, he still could not capture it. Puss, puss. The sharp sound seemed to cut through everyone's eardrums. In the boundless world, Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang suddenly opened their eyes and looked up. At this time, the sky had turned into a sea of fire. Countless sword auras formed from the sea of fire and fell. In just an instant, they pierced into everyone's eyes. They could not even feel the speed of the sword auras and the distance between the two sides. Before they could react, the sword will had already pierced into their spiritual souls. Boom! The qi that surrounded Qin Hao dissipated. The Tianluan and the flame divine power in his body were hidden in his flesh and blood. The will that shrouded the secret room dissipated. Everything returned to normal. Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang looked up in a daze. They could faintly see a terrifying flame matrix slowly dissipating from the red ceiling of the secret room. The three of them sat still and trembled. "What swordsmanship is this?" Wuk said in shock. He was born for the sword. Even someone as strong as Swordmaster Jinji was killed before he could react. It was terrifying. "I don't know either." Qin Hao chuckled. "Let's call it the spatial swordsmanship for now. As for the name, he really hadn't thought of it yet. However, this sword could cross the void and directly stab at the position of the opponent. Wherever the opponent was, Qin Hao's sword would be there. As long as his Tianluan divine power was strong enough, he could even sit here and urge the sword will to descend into the bedchamber of the god of the East. I don't even have a chance to reverse it." Xiao Han smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Because your cultivation is not high enough. It will be different when you cast the Tianluan." Qin Hao explained with a smile. "Teach me." Wuk stood up abruptly. It was too strong. This spatial swordsmanship was unreasonable. He had to learn it. "Okay." Qin Hao nodded. In fact, if he condensed the divine power of space in the Tianluan, the power of the sword qi of the void would be even greater. It was not something that could be achieved overnight. Tang scratched his ears and cheeks at the side with a sullen and bitter expression. After entering the Dongwang Pavilion, he seemed to have gained nothing. There was no sense of achievement. "Let's go." Qin Hao stood up and said to everyone. They should have cultivated for a long time. It was time to go back and say goodbye to Senior Illusion Lord. Dongwang Pavilion had too many spatial books. In just a few days, it was impossible to read all of them. Qin Hao learned a few powerful spatial techniques from them and cultivated a void sword technique that was suitable for him. It could be said that he had gained something. It was a pity that he had let go of a treasure pavilion. If he could move it into the divine wilderness, the warriors of the four regions who cultivated spatial abilities would definitely have an epic level of improvement. Qin Hao really wanted to put it into the Great Void Cauldron before he left and bring it back. Back to the Illusion Lord Palace. During this period of time, many big things had happened in the city. Higashua was taken away by Dongbo Supreme God's subordinates and left the Mirage Plain. No one knew where she went. In addition, the god of the East had issued an oracle to strip the Illusion Lord of his authority as the heavenly law controller. From now on, the Mirage Plain was under the control of Dongbo Supreme God. These two matters had alarmed Mirage City, especially the second one. Although the aristocratic families had long known that the god of the East was going to abolish the Illusion Lord, when the day actually came, they were still shocked. After all, the Illusion Lord had guarded the Mirage continent for his entire life, benefiting the living beings of the plane. He had even nurtured a heavenly wheel expert. Even if there was no merit, there was still hard work. In order to centralize power in the hands of his family, the god of the East had abolished the Illusion Lord. His actions were swift and decisive, not giving the latter any leeway. However, no one dared to go against the will of the god of the East. The entire space world was under the god of the East. Senior, we have been here for half a month to disturb Senior's meditation. Today we would like to bid farewell to Senior. In the cold and cheerless Illusion Lord's palace, Qin Hao cupped his hands towards the old figure sitting on the praying mat. It had only been half a month, but Qin Hao discovered that the Illusion Lord had obviously aged a lot compared to when they had first arrived. It was probably related to the heavenly law of mirage. The heavenly law energy that had been injected into the Illusion Lord's body had been extracted by Dong Huang. The Illusion Lord waved his hand and said, "What are you talking about? You have come to my place, but I have not provided you with anything." This old man is truly apologetic for not being able to act as a host. The Illusion Lord raised his head and let out a long sigh. He said, "It's also good that you leave early. Dong Bo is not a kind person. In order to forge the heavenly wheel, he once cruelly killed his fellow disciples. Because of you, his son was exiled by the god of the East. Dong Bo will definitely seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Leave early to avoid a calamity." "We have implicated Senior," Qin Hao said guiltily. They could wash their hands and leave, but the Illusion Lord who remained here would definitely suffer. Dong Bo would definitely vent his anger on Senior. "No matter. Although I have lost the support of the heavenly law, I am still an expert who forged the heavenly wheel. I can still borrow the power of all living beings. Dong Bo will not be able to do anything to old man. Being in charge was a position. With the Illusion Lord's strength, losing a title would not lead to a decline in his realm. Although that was the case, Qin Hao knew that without the protection of the god of the East's power, the Illusion Lord would definitely not be Dong Bo's opponent. A portion of the power of faith came from the god of the East. Dong Bo had it, but the Illusion Lord no longer had it. Go. Remember, during your training in the wilderness, you cannot mention the Origin Realm to anyone, the Illusion Lord warned. Qin Hao nodded and turned around. However, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he stayed for a few breaths. Then, he turned back and said, "Senior, are you really muddle-headed, or are you pretending? Dong Huang treated you like this, not caring about your hard work for tens of thousands of years. The world is so big. Senior, you are a heavenly wheel expert. Where can't you go?" Third year. The Illusion Lord's eyes became serious as he shouted, "I am, after all, a heavenly wheel expert of the Phantom Continent. There are many things here that still require my help." He naturally understood Qin Hao's meaning, but how could he give up so easily? He was once the god of this place, and all living beings believed in him. Was he going to abandon all living beings for a position? Was he even qualified to be a god? "Senior, please leave with us," Xiao Han said emotionally. He could understand the Illusion Lord's feelings, but he also had to think for himself. A mountain could not accommodate two tigers. Dong Huang dared to harm his fellow disciples, and even exiled his direct descendant's son with a single sentence. This Dong Huang's domain did not have the slightest bit of humanity. If the Illusion Lord died mysteriously one day, it would definitely be Dong Bo's doing. Staying here would be very dangerous. "Senior, my cultivation is currently far from Dong Huang's, but you know that the Origin Realm is in my hands. With the power of the Origin Realm, I may be able to surpass Dong Huang in the future. If you leave with me, you will be the future space god of the four regions." Qin Hao had already said this. If the Illusion Lord still chose to stay, he would be unable to help. Chapter 1969. Before coming to the Mirage Plane, Qin Hao had the thought of roping in the Illusion Sovereign. Especially after arriving and seeing the Illusion Sovereign's situation, his thoughts became even more firm. Roping him in was one thing, but whether or not the other party would agree was another. If the Illusion Reverend insisted on staying, Qin Hao would have no choice but to let Dong Bai make things difficult for him. What could Qin Hao do? Third year, some responsibilities have to be shouldered by someone. The illusion sovereign sighed emotionally. Let's go. Wuk glanced at the illusion sovereign. This old man's stubbornness was admirable. He would rather give up the original realm and complete the heavenly Tao than abandon his homeland. How many people in the world could do this? In fact, Wuk could understand this feeling the most. If it was him, even if the divine desolate continent was not the original realm, he would not easily leave after becoming a god and being roped in. Senior, take care. Qin Hao walked out of the hall, his heart filled with regret. The illusion sovereign's future days would definitely be more difficult. The group walked out of the hall and suddenly, a dazzling divine radiance descended from the sky, blocking Qin Hao's path. These divine radiance landed on the ground and transformed into countless divine guards clad in resplendent armor, blocking the path. Right in front of them, 3 experts whose auras were no weaker than Yukong's stood side by side. They looked at Qin Hao and the others with a smile. A mighty divine general in the middle asked, "Everyone, where are you going?" Divine General Dong Bai. Qin Hao's group suddenly stopped and stared at the crowd surrounding them. From their clothes, it was not hard to tell that they were the subordinates of Supreme God Dong Bai. This group of people did not come with good intentions. "Where we are going is none of your business," Wuk said sternly. "Where the cultivators of Sword World go is none of our business, but I suspect that you are not from Sword World. Under Supreme God Dong Bai's orders, we are to detain those impersonating sword cultivators from Sword World and trying to destroy the Mirage Continent. After verifying their identities, they will be taken away by Sword World. If they dare to resist, they will be killed on the spot." The leading divine general shouted and waved his hand. "Take them down." Voila! More than 100 divine guards marched forward like a 10,000-man battle formation. They exuded surging murderous aura. Every divine guard was encircled by divine light. They had been bestowed with spatial divine energy. Motherf *****. Tang flew into a rage the moment he was provoked. He gathered his palms together and phoenix flames surged. "Hold on!" Qin Hao shouted and raised his hand to stop Kuang Tang. He frowned and said, "May I ask what proof do you have to prove that we are not from the Sword World?" That shout from before had indeed disrupted everyone's state of mind. However, Qin Hao reacted very quickly. It was impossible for Dong Bai's subordinates to discover their disguise. The purpose of doing so was to embarrass the Sword World. They had purposely detained the people and allowed the seniors of the Sword World to personally come over. After all, Higashiwa had been exiled by the Godmaster because of Qin Hao, and Dong Bai had found an excuse to take revenge. At this moment, Qin Hao sneered in his heart. It was as the illusion god had said. He had not expected Dong Bai to act so quickly. "Do you need proof to doubt me?" The leading divine general raised his head and coldly said, "You all better be honest and obediently listen to the arrangements of God Dong Bai. Otherwise, you will suffer physical pain." This divine general clenched his fist. 9 realms of light encircled his mighty body. Particle halos floated up from his feet. There were a total of 7 layers. 7th level of laws. Wuk became more serious. The other party believed that they would be defeated. "Yukong is the weakest among us. What God's son Higashiwa said is correct. Defeating him is nothing to be proud of. Even if I cannot kill you all directly, the Sword World will not say anything if I accidentally cripple you during the process of resisting." The leading divine general revealed a malevolent expression. If the status of Qin Hao's group was high enough, they could be recovered by the Heaven Wheel experts of the Sword World. If their status was too low, then so be it. The Sword World would not care. Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang all looked at Qin Hao, waiting for his decision. Dong Bai had sent a 7th-level Law Nirvana expert. Even if there was no proof that they were impersonators, they were in fact impersonators. They could not leave with Dong Bai's people. If they were detained and the news spread to the great Tao Sword world, then their identities would be exposed. Qin Hao's expression became more and more serious. A blind cat had hit a dead mouse. Dong Bai had unexpectedly grasped his weakness. At this moment, killing intent arose in Qin Hao's heart. He was considering whether he should make a move and use the illusion Heavenly Tao to directly kill this group of people. Hua Ke, you are becoming more and more impudent. Now, you have come to my divine palace to wantonly detain people. Have you ever put the old man in your eyes? At this moment, an old man walked out of the illusion god palace. The old divine robe on his body fluttered, emitting an unparalleled might. Greetings, illusion god. The leading divine general Hua Ke cupped his hands and bowed. We greet illusion god. The other two nirvana experts, as well as the divine guards, knelt down on one knee. Although the illusion god had been stripped of his position as the heavenly Tao controller, he was still a heavenly wheel expert. Illusion god, this general is acting under the orders of Dong by Supreme God. I hope illusion god does not blame me. At this moment, Hua Ke said with an ugly expression. Without Dong Bai's orders, even if he had 100 guts, he would not dare to behave atrociously here. A few hundred years ago, this illusion god palace had tens of thousands of disciples. Humph! The illusion god heavily snorted and pointed at Qin Hao, saying, Li Chuji and the old man have met once. They passed by here and came to visit me. The old man can testify that they are all from the great Tao Sword world. Let them go immediately. This. Hua Ke looked at the two nirvana experts beside him with a very difficult expression. It was Dong Bai's order to arrest them, but with the illusion god standing here, who would dare to make a move? Illusion god, are you really going to embarrass me for a few children? 1. The void trembled as a ball of resplendent divine light radiated out, revealing a huge face that was born in the sky above the illusion god palace. Its eyes contained a cold and ruthless luster. When this face appeared, a heavenly might suddenly descended, suppressing Qin Hao and his group. It also suppressed the position of the illusion god, causing the old man's body to tremble slightly. The illusion god raised his head and looked at this cold face, remaining silent for a long time. Following the orders of the god of the east, as expected, Dong Bai descended to the illusion god plane. He actually came so quickly. Dong Bai, Higashua was exiled by the great Tao Sword world. I am very sorry. If you have any problems, come at me. Why do you have to make things difficult for a few juniors? The illusion god said. Illusion god, what do you mean by this? My son was exiled because of his own actions. It has nothing to do with you. Now I suspect that they are not from the great Tao Sword world. I also did not say anything about punishment. Why are you so anxious to stand out? Dong Bai narrowed his eyes and said coldly. He had just arrived at the illusion god plane, and the previous heavenly Tao Sword world was already prepared to show his strength? To suppress the arrogance of the supreme god Dong Bai? Dong Bai, since the great Tao Sword world, has already given the order to appoint you as the ruler of the illusion god plane, this old man will naturally follow the will of the great Tao Sword world. You are the ruler of the plane and will fully cooperate. However, you should not take this old man too lightly. The illusion god said angrily. Qin Hao and the others were just an excuse for Dong Bai to stir up trouble. The other's true goal was undoubtedly to vent his anger on him and prove to the world who was the real winner between him and the illusion god. This was a game between the heavenly wheel realm experts. Men, capture him for me. Dong Bai ignored the illusion god and loudly ordered. Yes. Hua Ke raised his head, his gaze locking onto Qin Hao. He stretched out his hand and grabbed him. The rest of the god generals and god guards also acted. Scram. The illusion god raised his hand and lifted his divine robe. 1. An explosion sounded in the air. It was as though a tidal wave had erupted out of nowhere. The surging divine Tao light waves forced Hua Ke and the others back. More than 100 divine guards were sprawled all over the place. Seeing this, Dong Bai's huge face above the illusion god palace sank. His eyes shot out a sharp divine light. Suddenly, a layer of invisible space energy descended from the sky above the illusion god palace. A loud whistling sound was heard, and a heavenly might aura was suffocating. Dong Bai, you have gone too far, the illusion god shouted. He took a step forward, his body flying towards the sky. Immediately, a resplendent heavenly wheel divine light bloomed, causing all things to lose their color. The entire illusion god palace turned black. Divine light rays extended towards the body like meridians, gradually covering the illusion god's divine body. These divine light rays were not like Qin Hao's, which could reach every part of his body. They only covered the upper half of the illusion god's body before stopping. The heavenly Tao was flawed, and the heavenly wheel that the illusion god had cast was also incomplete. Mortal grade. Qin Hao looked at the sky and muttered. His words passed into the ears of Shao Han, Wuk, and Tang. Heavenly wheels were divided into 4 grades: mortal grade, saint grade, immortal grade, and perfect grade. Mortal grade was called small heavenly wheel in the cultivation world. Saint grade was called great heavenly wheel. Divine lords usually had immortal grade heavenly wheels. For example, Qin Hao's was called divine king grade. The illusion god was a small heavenly wheel. Furthermore, his divine power did not even cover the upper half of his body. Break! Dong Bai shouted. Dong Bai's actions had completely enraged the previous heavenly Tao wielder. The illusion god punched towards the sky. Space energy exploded from his heavenly wheel, and with a shattering sound, the divine intent suppressing the ancient palace was penetrated. The fist continued to move upwards, directly piercing through the huge face in the sky. The face that Supreme God Dong Bai had condensed was like a cracked mirror, crumbling bit by bit. Pung! A heavy heavenly pressure pressed into the illusion god palace. The palace that had existed for 10,000 years was instantly razed to the ground. Other than the place where Qin Hao and the rest were standing, the entire orthodoxy of the illusion god was crushed into rubble by Dong Bai. When a heavenly wheel expert attacked, ordinary materials would not be able to withstand the might of the divine Tao, even if a trace of divine intent descended. Good, very good. Publicly attacking a heavenly Tao wielder, you want to go against the will of a divine lord and rebel against the Donghuang realm? A resplendent figure flew over from the direction of the Donghuang pavilion. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the illusion god. The two coldly faced each other. Isn't this what you wanted? Less nonsense, I want to see who dares to touch them. The illusion god angrily shouted. Dong Bai was unwilling to give up even though he controlled the illusion heavenly Tao. Today, he had come to force him to make a move, taking the opportunity to sweep him out of the illusion continent. Then come. Dong Bai chuckled as he stared at the illusion god. Immediately, he opened his palms, and his will dominated the heavenly Tao. A gorgeous heavenly wheel light gradually covered his body, and space energy surged within the heavenly wheel. Just like the illusion god, Dong Bai's divine light passed through the entire left side of his divine body. Although his heavenly wheel was also damaged, his heavenly wheel was clearly stronger than the illusion god's. 3 palms, can you withstand it? Dong Bai smiled. Endless divine power surged into his palms, and he raised them to attack the illusion god. The two gods stood in the sky, and everything in Illusion City lost its color. Countless martial artists prostrated themselves on the ground, not having the courage to raise their heads. Chapter 1970. As soon as Dong Bai moved, Illusion Zun followed closely behind. The heavenly wheels of the two experts were too dazzling. From afar, they looked like 2 glaring rays of light, madly colliding with each other. However, these two rays of light inexplicably gave people the illusion that they were parallel. Even if they tried their best to approach each other, they were unable to cross. 1. The void trembled as though an external force had suddenly descended. It was incomparably vast and domineering, enveloping the area where the heavenly wheel experts were fighting. Faintly, one could hear the roar of the heavenly Tao of Mirage. Illusion Zun's divine energy surged forward and punched at Dong Bai, only to hit empty air. His face could not help but be filled with shock and astonishment. In front of his eyes was an intense radiance of particles. His consciousness fell into the illusion of space being reversed and stars moving. When he calmed down, he discovered that the scene had changed. They were no longer in Mirage City, but in a vast and desolate universe. This Illusion Zun's heart was in turmoil. He looked around, baffled. Countless planes were flickering in the vast galaxy. He lowered his head and looked at his feet. He was actually standing on a huge divine sword. This divine sword was like an emerald. The sword's edge was filled with flames as it slowly moved forward in the desolate universe. Qin Hao and the others were standing there. "Senior, don't panic. We have safely left the Mirage Plane." Qin Hao stood with his hands behind his back, standing at the front of the Void Sword. He turned his head and smiled at Illusion Zun. "You did it." Illusion Zun was speechless and shocked. Qin Hao had arbitrarily used the energy of the heavenly Tao to move them out of Mirage City in an instant. Furthermore, Illusion Zun sized up this universe and quickly recognized their location. They had not only left the Mirage continent, they had also left Donghuang's realm. This ability... Sigh, I'm getting old. Illusion Zun dispersed his heavenly wheel divine energy and shook his head. The waves behind the divine river would always surpass the waves before. Qin Hao had only been cultivating the Tao of space in Donghuang's pavilion for half a month, but he had actually reached such an unfathomable height. Let alone the Illusion Senior not being able to react, even Dong Bo Si was most likely confused. Of course, this was related to the grade of the heavenly wheels. His and Dong Bo's heavenly wheels were damaged and were considered defective product. Qin Hao's was a perfect product and had the potential to become a divine king in the future. The strength of the heavenly wheel determined the level of divine power and the strength of the Tao intent released. A perfect heavenly wheel's spatial manipulation ability was definitely stronger than the Illusion Elders and Dong Bai's. We are from the Origin Realm and not the Sword Realm. You know this, but Dong Bai and Donghuang don't. If we continue to pester them, we will inevitably expose our identities. Once Donghuang arrives, we won't be able to escape. I hope Senior can understand. Qin Hao said. He had no choice but to bring Huan Zun out. The Illusion Elder waved his hand and said, "Perhaps this is the arrangement of fate." Letting out a long sigh, the Illusion Reverend revealed a relieved expression. He had never thought of abandoning the illusion. Even if he was stripped of his deity position, even if he would be suppressed by Dong Bai in the future, his heart would not waver. However, Dong Bai continued to force him. Finally, without exhausting the Illusion Senior's patience, he had already been forced out of his homeland. How laughable and hateful! Since things have reached this point, what plans does Senior Illusion Reverend have? Wuk asked. The old man was still unwilling to follow them, and they would not force him. If it was in the past, old man would have gone to find one of my disciples, but now he has changed his mind. Dong Bai wants to show off his divine power and suppress old man, so I will play with him until the end. Right? Does the position of Space God Master count? The Illusion Reverend carefully looked at Qin Hao. He did not want to go back on his words. Of course it counts. Qin Hao laughed. Ha ha, then I will follow you. The Illusion Reverend patted his chest and said heroically. He had once been young and frivolous. However, as his cultivation increased, he became indifferent to worldly matters. Until he cultivated the heavenly wheel and became one with the heavens, He did not enter the cycle of reincarnation. Today's matter had stimulated the illusion reverend. Since he had once been hot-blooded, why not be hot-blooded again? Congratulations, illusion reverend, for becoming the space god master of the divine wilderness. Xiao Han congratulated. Senior, I also congratulate you, Tang said enviously. Unfortunately, you are the only god in the divine wilderness that can control space, so you do not have any subordinate. Wuk said awkwardly. Including Qin Hao, there were only 2 heavenly wheel experts in the divine wilderness. It doesn't matter. There will be one in the future, ha ha ha. The illusion reverend was very open-minded. How could the origin realm lack gods? It was only a matter of time. However, there were many unknowns and dangers in between. The divine wilderness was a perfect heavenly Tao. If it was not strong enough, it would sooner or later be seized by others or disappear, just like the tragedy that happened in the origin realm, where all life was exterminated. On the other hand, once the divine wilderness was strong enough to be like the immemorial realm, where godly kings could run rampant, which side would not dare to provoke them? The divine wilderness needed to grow. Qin Hao and the others were taking a huge risk, and the illusion reverend was willing to bear it with them. In the battle back then, the gods of the plain used up all their divine power to lay down a protective seal, which maintained the peace of the divine wilderness for 10,000 years. Now, the seal's divine power has been weakened by the wilderness, and it will only last for a limited time. In the near future, it will definitely collapse. When that time comes, the origin realm will be filled with the aura of the origin realm, and it will definitely be invaded by armies from the outside world. Qin Hao did not want to hide the divine wilderness situation. How long will it take? The illusion reverend asked. 4,000 years. Qin Hao replied. It's a bit urgent. The illusion reverend felt the pressure. 4,000 years was too short, and it was not easy to cultivate the divine path. Therefore, this is one of the reasons why I invited you. The divine wilderness needs experts from other planes to join. Moreover, you should know that beings with a perfected heavenly Tao have an innate advantage. Their cultivation speed is faster. Back then, because they lost their divine lineage, there was a gap between the Nirvana realm and the heavenly wheel realm. Therefore, there were no gods for 10,000 years. Now I have built divine pavilions in the 4 regions of the continent, storing various types of heavenly emperor arts for the Nirvana realm to condense their laws. I have also left behind a divine will for them to comprehend. Qin Hao had confidence in the divine wilderness. That's great. The pressure on the illusion reverend lessened. He had not seen the origin realm, and did not understand the strength of a perfected heavenly Tao. But from Qin Hao's performance and tone in Mirage City, the origin realm could indeed create miracles. Senior has not been to the divine wilderness, and is currently unable to obtain the recognition of the heavenly Tao, nor can you absorb the energy of the space creatures. All of this requires us to strengthen the power of the heavenly wheel. Qin Hao said. Nirvana was the path to becoming a god, and faith was the source. The key to faith was the affirmation and recognition of oneself, followed by the heavenly Tao and all living beings. For the illusion reverend to reach this step, his Tao heart was naturally incomparably stable, and he would not doubt his Tao. If he wanted to become a divine lord in the divine wilderness, what he lacked was the latter. He needed the recognition of the heavenly Tao, as well as the hope of all living beings. The illusion reverend nodded. He understood. Then, where do we go next? Wuk looked at the boundless universe of stars. He could no longer find the way back to the divine wilderness, nor could he feel the slightest aura of the divine wilderness continent. Senior, what do you think? Qin Hao did not have a clear impression of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao asked. I can't beat you. The illusion reverend smiled. That's right. The heavenly Ho divine realm has a continent called Kunlun, and it is a rather special plane. The illusion reverend revealed a strange expression. What's special about it? Qin Hao asked. Alchemy in this place gave birth to an unparalleled pill god, who was glorious for a time in the heavenly Ho divine realm, suppressing many heavenly wheel experts. Later, the pill god fell, and the Kunlun continent was unable to recover from the setback, gradually weakening, and no more heavenly wheel experts were born. Even so, no other heavenly wheel experts dared to touch the heavenly Ho divine realm, as they were still intimidated by the pill god's former fame. Furthermore, the heavenly Ho divine lord ordered that the Kunlun heavenly Tao could only be controlled by the experts of the Kunlun continent. As long as the Kunlun divine lord is not active, the Kunlun heavenly Tao has no one to control it. The illusion reverend looked at Qin Hao with a burning gaze. Kid, your chance has come. Once you control the heavenly Tao and become the god of Kunlun, you will have an army of extraordinary alchemists. You should be very clear about the use of alchemists. The illusion reverend laughed strangely. The simple old man was now like a sly old fox. Chapter 1971. Thump, thump. Qin Hao and the others were greatly shaken. As long as Kunlun was not in a daze, the heavenly Tao would have no one to control it. The Kunlun plane was a land without a master. The illusion god's words had evoked a strong desire in their hearts. If Qin Hao controlled the Kunlun heavenly Tao, all the experts of the plane would listen to his orders. If this plan succeeded, not only would it provide Qin Hao with a reasonable identity in the great desolate world, the Kunlun continent would be under the protection of Divine Lord Tianyong. This almighty expert was so strong that he could contend against god kings. With such a powerful backing, even if Qin Hao accidentally exposed his identity in the future, he would have nothing to fear. The entire Heaven's Oyster domain would become the Divine Desolate's support. The illusion god had indeed pointed out a broad and clear path for him. To control a plane and become a god of Kunlun, the test is extraordinarily high. Xiao Han silently glanced at Qin Hao. From the illusion god's words, he had a rough understanding of Kunlun's situation. To become a god in this place was easier said than done. It's naturally not easy. A god recognized by Divine Lord Tianyong is definitely not an ordinary heavenly wheel realm expert. The illusion god said. The Kunlun continent definitely did not lack heavenly wheel experts. What it lacked was a powerhouse who could suppress all heavenly wheel experts and whose divine abilities could convince all heavenly wheel experts. Otherwise, how could the heavenly Tao easily recognize and control such a person? Qin Hao revealed a worried smile. From this, he could foresee that the Kunlun continent was not only powerful, but also very chaotic. Since there was a heavenly wheel expert who was not recognized by Divine Lord Tianyong, the pressure from all sides to become the ruler of the Kunlun continent would be enormous. The challenge was truly not small. Senior, tell me about a peerless pill god. Qin Hao was very curious about this. What kind of extraordinary expert was the other party? Not only did he rule over the entire Kunlun continent, but his fame still shook the universe after his death, causing the formidable martial artists of the other planes in the Heavens Bar domain to not dare to touch the Kunlun continent. That expert. Illusion Reverend looked into the distance. He had only heard of a few things. He is an extremely powerful person, and his name is Exalted Zihua. There are many divine Tao sects in the land of Kunlun, and when Exalted Zihua was still alive, all the forces treated him with respect and were very united. Relying on Exalted Zihua's alchemy skills, Kunlun became stronger and stronger, and its light shone on the entire Heaven Wall domain. His influence radiated out from Heaven Wall and spread to many great worlds, attracting many great heavenly wheel experts to visit him. Even God Lord Dong Huang personally came to Kunlun Sea to befriend Exalted Zihua. The divine path divided the heavenly wheels into high and low rank. The mortal grade was the small heavenly wheel, the saint grade was the large heavenly wheel, and the divine lord grade was mostly the immortal grade. For Supreme Zihua to be able to make Dongwang cross over to visit him, it was enough to show how prosperous Kunlun was at that time. What an extraordinary expert! Wuk said with longing. He was born at the wrong time and couldn't meet him. Qin Hao nodded. Since he was called Supreme Zihua, he was naturally not an ordinary divine path expert. The heavenly wheel he forged was probably close to the immortal grade. Otherwise, why would Dongwang lower himself to go to Kunlun Sea and sit on the same level as the god of Kunlun and treat him as an equal? It's a pity that Zihua didn't rule Kunlun for a long time. I don't know what happened, but he died for no reason. When the news spread out, it shocked all the big world. Countless heavenly wheel realm experts lamented the death of a pill god. The illusion god shook his head and sighed. At that time, the entire Dongwang realm was shaken. The god of the East didn't express anything about the death of Supreme Zihua, nor did he go to pay his respects. He didn't even go to Kunlun after that. However, on that day in the main god palace of the Heaven Ho realm, someone vaguely heard extremely sorrowful cries. This was a secret of the Heaven Ho realm, so it wasn't widely spread. It was only spread among the heavenly wheel realm experts. Zihua's death caused God Lord Tianho to cry. Whether it was true or not, it was still a matter of face and had a bad impact on God Lord Tianho. From then on, the Kunlun Sea disappeared from the Kunlun continent. Until God Lord Tianho gave the order that as long as Kunlun didn't have a deity, the heavenly Tao would be without a master. After that, the Kunlun Sea reappeared. Every 1,000 years, the disciples of the Kunlun Sea would hold a gathering to mourn the death of Supreme Zihua. The original intention of holding this gathering was to mourn the ancestors. However, starting from the first gathering, the gathering of experts from various large worlds gradually changed its nature and became a gathering of experts. It continued to this day without stopping, and the number of participants was increasing. Could it be that there are benefits? Qin Hao asked. The illusion venerable nodded. There are indeed benefits. The Kunlun Sea has been passed down for many years, and Supreme Zihua was a famous giant expert who built his career on the Tao of pills. There are countless spiritual treasures planted on the islands of the Kunlun Sea, as well as many opportunities left behind by great experts to comprehend the Tao. Therefore, the land of Kunlun will become the focus of various large worlds when the Millennium Gathering begins. Send a report to the Dongwang Palace, saying that the illusion sovereign didn't listen to this sovereign's discipline and attacked the controller of the heavenly Tao with malice, betraying the Dongwang realm. Let the divine master chase after him. Dongbai turned and flew towards the Dongwang pavilion. He didn't care about the illusion sovereign's fate. It was better that he left. In the future, he would have the final say here. But Hua Ke looked at the place where Qin Hao stood with a puzzled expression. Just now, someone used the power of Tao fire, and his whole body was covered in flames. He didn't look like a sword cultivator, could it be? Forget it. Since God Dongbai didn't care, he, Hua Ke, wouldn't look for trouble. At this moment, the illusion sovereign palace was razed to the ground by Dongbai's divine power, leaving the illusion sovereign palace standing alone. It was as if telling the continent's cultivators that a god once lived here. But that was only in the past. The news of the illusion sovereign's departure quickly reached the ears of the god of the East through the Dongwang pavilion. Regarding this, the main palace didn't give any orders, as if the illusion sovereign had never existed in the Dongwang realm, leaving him to evaporate for no reason. At this moment, Qin Hao and the others were using their divine equipment to travel through the great desolate realm, passing by one realm after another, gradually getting closer to the Heaven Ho realm. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.